Clara Winslow dropped to her knees on the hot boards of the depot platform and gathered the torn pieces of her teaching contract with shaking hands, while 40 people watched and not one of them moved. The child behind her didn't cry. Clara did quietly with her face turned away so the little girl wouldn't hear it. 3 minutes earlier she'd had a position, a home, and a future in Red Valley, Montana. Now she had a suitcase, a 6-year-old who hadn't spoken in a year and nowhere on God's earth to go. If a story like this moves you, please subscribe and stay with me all the way to the end and leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from, so I can see how far Clara's story travels tonight. The train put her off at Red Valley at 20 minutes past 4 on the hottest afternoon of July 1882, and then it went away and took the noise with it. Clara Winslow stood on the platform with a leather suitcase in one hand and a child's fingers in the other, and she waited for somebody to come and say her name. Nobody came. The station master came out, though. He was a narrow man of about 60, with ink on 2 fingers and a green shade pushed back on his head, and he looked at her the way a man looks at a package that has arrived with the address rubbed off. "Ma'am, good afternoon." Clara set the suitcase down and put her hand out. "Clara Winslow. I'm the new school teacher." He didn't take the hand right away. He looked past her shoulder at the little girl. "That yours? Her name is Nell." "That ain't what I asked." Clara kept her hand out until it got heavy, and then she let it fall. "She's my sister's daughter. My sister passed a year ago last April." "Uh-huh." The station master wiped his palm on his vest and finally shook one short pump like a man being polite to a stranger at a funeral. "Odell Pratt. I keep the depot." "Mr. Pratt, I was told the school board would meet me." "They was told too." He glanced up the street. "Somebody rode up 10 minutes back. They know you're here." "Then I'll wait." "I reckon you will." I went back inside. The door banged. Clara stood in the sun with her hand on the top of Nell's head, and she made herself breathe slow, because there was a thing happening in her chest that she recognized and did not want. She had felt it in St. Louis too, the day they read her out. "Nell," she said softly, "are you thirsty?" Nell didn't answer. Nell never answered. She just leaned her forehead against Clara's hip and held on to 2 fingers of Clara's hand, the way she had held on across 400 miles of rail and 2 changes of train and 1 night on a bench in Bismarck. "All right," Clara said. "We'll wait together then." They came up the street at 4:30, 3 men and a woman walking in a line like a jury. Clara knew which one mattered before anybody spoke. He was in front, a heavy-set man in a good gray coat that he had no business wearing in that heat, and he wore it anyway because the coat said something about him, and he wanted it said. "Miss Winslow." "Yes, sir, yes." "Harlan Fitch, chairman of the Red Valley School Board." He didn't offer his hand. "This is Reverend Ames, Mr. Dowd, our treasurer, my wife, Mrs. Fitch." "It's an honor. I've been writing to Mr. Dowd since February." "You have," Fitch said. "You wrote a great deal." Something in the way he said it made Clara go still. "Sir." Fitch reached inside the gray coat and brought out a folded paper. He did it slowly. He did it, Clara understood later, so that everybody on that street had time to see him do it. The men at the freight dock, the 2 boys on the water troughed the women in the shade of the mercantile awning, who had drifted up the boardwalk without seeming to move at all. "You wrote to us that you had 5 years' experience at the 2nd Ward School in St. Louis." "That's correct." "You wrote that you were released in March at the close of term." "That's..." Clara's mouth went dry. "That's what I wrote." "It ain't what happened." Fitch unfolded the paper. "This is a letter from the superintendent of schools for the city of St. Louis, Missouri. It came on Tuesday's train. Would you like me to read it out?" The whole street heard him ask it. That was the point of asking. "No, sir," Clara said quietly. "I know what it says." "Then say it." Clara looked at him. She was 26 years old, and she had crossed half a continent on a contract in her pocket, and she understood in that moment that the contract had been dead for 4 days, and they had let her ride anyway. "It says I was dismissed for moral cause," she said. Somebody in the crowd made a sound. "Louder, please," Fitch said. "The board is entitled to hear it." I was dismissed for moral cause." Her voice didn't shake, and she was proud of that for the rest of her life. The cause was this child. Nell's fingers tightened on hers. Reverend Ames cleared his throat. "Miss Winslow, if there is an explanation." "There is." "Then give it," Fitch said. And Clara Winslow stood on that platform and made the choice that everything after it came out of. She could have said it plain. She could have laid her sister's whole life out on the boards in front of 40 people. Ruth's name, Ruth's shame, the man who left the winter, the fever, all of it. She could have bought her position back with it. It would have worked. She knew it would have worked. But Nell was 6 years old, and Nell would live in this town, and a town does not forget a thing it has heard out loud. "The child is my sister's daughter," Clara said. "My sister is dead. I took her in. The board in St. Louis asked me to place her with the county home and remain in my position. I declined. They dismissed me. That is the whole of it." "That is not the whole of it," Fitch said. "It's the whole of what I'll say." "Miss Winslow." "It's the whole of what I'll say, Mr. Fitch." The silence that came down on that platform was the loudest thing Clara had ever heard. Fitch folded the letter. He was not a stupid man. He had been prepared for tears, and he had been prepared for lies, and he had not been prepared for a woman who simply shut the door and stood in front of it. "You'll understand my position," he said. "I'd like to. I have 31 children in this valley. 31. Their mothers hand them to me every September, and they ask me one question: who is she?" He tapped the letter against his knuckles. "I can't answer that about you. You won't let me. You can answer that I'm a teacher. I can answer that you were run out of a Missouri schoolhouse, and you came here without saying so." "I came here," Clara said, "because your treasurer wrote to me that Red Valley needed somebody who'd stay." "We do. Then you have her." "No, ma'am," Fitch said. "We have a problem." He held out his hand, and Dowd put a second paper in it, and Clara knew what that one was before she saw it, because it had her own handwriting on the back, where she'd copied the terms out for herself in February. "The board met last night," Fitch said. "Vote was 4-1. 4-1, Clara repeated. "I'll not pretend it was closer than it was." He tore it. He didn't tear it in anger. That was the thing Clara remembered, that his face never changed, that he tore her contract the way a man tears a receipt. He's finished with once across and once again. And then he opened his fingers and let the pieces go, and the hot wind coming up off the rail bed took them and scattered them down the length of the platform. Somebody laughed. That was the sound. One man back near the freight dock. One short, ugly bark of a laugh, and then 2 more people laughing, because the first one had, and then the crowd had a noise in it, and the noise was moving. "She brought a young'un. Schoolmarm's got her own schoolhouse." "Hush," a woman said. Nobody hushed. And Clara Winslow got down on her knees on the hot boards in front of all of them and started picking up the pieces of her contract. She never afterward knew why she did it. There was nothing left in that paper. But her hands wanted something to do besides shake, and so she gathered the pieces one at a time and stacked them and pressed them flat against her skirt. And she did not look up, because if she looked up, they would see her face, and she was not going to give them that. A pair of small shoes came into her view. Nell had gotten down on the boards beside her. The child was picking up pieces too, solemn as a judge, handing them over one and one and one. That was what broke Clara. Not Fitch, not the letter, not the laughing. Her niece, 6 years old, on her knees on a train platform, helping her gather up the ruin. Clara turned her head away and wept for about 4 seconds silently, and then she stopped because there wasn't time. "Miss Winslow." Mrs. Fitch had come forward a step. Adeline Fitch was a small woman with a kind, frightened face, and she had her hands knotted in front of her. "Miss Winslow, there's a good boarding house at the end of—" "Adeline," Fitch said. His wife stopped talking. Clara stood up. She put the pieces in her pocket. She straightened her cuffs one and then the other. "Mr. Fitch." "Ma'am." "I've traveled 11 days to get here." "I'm aware. I have $4.60. Fitch looked at her for a long moment. And to his credit, to what little credit that man had that day, he did not enjoy it. "Westbound comes through Thursday morning," he said. "6:40. I'll pay your fare back to Missouri out of my own pocket, and no man in this valley will hear about it from me. That's charity. That's Thursday, Miss Winslow. Take it or don't." He touched his hat brim, and he turned, and the four of them walked back up the street the way they had come, and the crowd broke apart around them and went back to whatever it had been doing before a woman got ruined in public on a Monday afternoon. Clara tried the boarding house first. The woman who kept it, a Mrs. Deaver, came out onto her own porch and stood in the doorway with her arms folded so there'd be no misunderstanding about her not stepping aside. "I know who you are." "Ma'am, I can pay for 2 nights." "I know who you are," Mrs. Deaver said again. "And I've got 6 ladies boarding under this roof, and every one of 'em has got a father or a husband who'd have something to say. It's 1 room. It's 2 nights. It's my living. Ma'am, please. The child." "The child," Mrs. Deaver said, and something moved in her face, something that was almost shame. "The child is the trouble, ain't she?" The door shut. Clara stood there a moment. Then she picked up the suitcase and went to the hotel. The hotel had a room. The clerk had it written on his board in chalk. He looked at the board, and then out the window at the street, and then he wiped the chalk off with the side of his hand. "We're full. It's on your board." "We're full, ma'am." "Sir, I can see the—" "I'm real sorry." He was too. That was somehow worse. "She went to the church last because you go to the church last when you still have some pride. And by then it was going on 7, and the light had gone long and orange across the front of the building. Reverend Ames met her at the steps. He didn't let her get up them. "Miss Winslow." "Reverend." "I want you to know I voted against." Clara waited. "I was the one," he said. 4-1. "I want you to know that." "Thank you. I've a wife and a congregation, and I—" He stopped. He took his spectacles off and rubbed them on his sleeve, which is what a man does when he'd rather not be looking at somebody. "There's the depot. Odell keeps it open till the 10 o'clock freight. It's out of the wind." "It's July, Reverend." "Yes," he said. Well, and Clara Winslow understood that she had just been told by the one man in Red Valley who had voted for her to go sleep on a bench. She fed Nell on the platform out of the last of what she'd packed in Bismarck. Bread gone hard, 2 boiled eggs, an apple cut in halves with a pocket knife. She gave the child both halves and told her she wasn't hungry, and Nell looked at her for a long moment with her mother's exact eyes, and then handed 1 half back. "Nell." The girl pushed it into her hand and closed her fingers over it. Clara ate it. It was the best thing she ever tasted, and she couldn't get it down for crying, so she turned her back and ate it that way. Odell Pratt came out at dusk with a tin cup of water and set it down on the bench without a word, and went back inside. An hour later, he came out again and set down a folded horse blanket and said, "Nights get cold up here even in July. Air's thin." And then, because he was embarrassed, "Don't tell nobody." "Thank you, Mr. Pratt. I ain't done nothing. You've done more than the church did." He winced at that and went inside and blew out his lamp. Clara sat on the bench with Nell's head in her lap and counted her money again in the dark as though it might have changed. $4.60. A fare to Missouri that Harlan Fitch would pay, and a schoolhouse in Missouri that would not have her, and a county home in St. Louis with a matron who had told her to her face, "Miss Winslow, you will marry some day, and no man alive will take another man's shame into his house along with a bride." Clara put her hand on Nell's hair. "He was wrong," she said out loud to nobody. "He was wrong about a lot of things." Nell slept. The marshal came at 9:30. His name was Boone Latimer, and he was a decent enough man in the way that men are decent when it costs them nothing, and he stood at the bottom of the platform steps with his thumbs in his belt and would not come up. "Miss." Clara sat up. She put a hand over Nell's ear. "Marshal, you can't bed down here. Mr. Pratt hasn't objected. Odell don't make the ordinance." He shifted his weight. "Vagrancy's a fine of $5 or 3 days. I ain't going to fine you, ma'am. I'm telling you so you know where the line is. I'll be gone Thursday. That's what I come about. Latimer looked off up the street. There was some talk tonight at the Fitch house about the girl. Everything in Clara went cold and quiet. What about her? There's a county home at Helena. No. Ma'am, no. I ain't the one deciding it, Latimer said, and his voice had gone gentler, and that made it worse because a man's voice goes gentle when the thing is already done. There's a judge comes through in September, a woman with no means and no roof, and a child that ain't legally hers. She is mine. Papers, ma'am. Clara didn't answer. That's what I figured, Latimer said. You get on that Thursday train. You get her out of this county before September, and don't nobody have to sign nothing. That's the whole of my advice, and it's better advice than I'm paid to give. He touched his hat and walked off down the middle of the street, and his boots on the packed dirt was the last sound Clara heard for a long while. She sat there in the dark with her hand still over her niece's ear. Then she bent down, put her face against the child's hair, and said the thing she had not let herself say in 11 days of traveling. I don't know what to do. Caleb Stone came down off the North Ridge at 4 in the morning, because he'd promised a horse buyer he'd have 4 head at the stock pens by 6, and he had never in his life been late to a thing he'd said he'd do. I wasn't a man who came to town. Twice a year, 3 times if the winter went bad. He kept 60 horses on a bench of high grass 11 miles past the Ridge Road, and he ran them with 2 hands and a deaf dog. And the last time Red Valley had seen his face in daylight had been the previous September. He brought the 4 head down and penned them and paid Odell Pratt the loading fee and was standing at the pens with the receipt in his hand when the sun came up over the depot roof, and that was when he saw her. A woman asleep sitting up on this platform bench, straight-backed, even asleep, with a child laid out across her lap, and a horse blanket over the both of them, and a leather suitcase set at her feet, like a dog that wouldn't leave. Caleb Stone stood there for a while. Then he went and asked, Odell. Caleb. That woman. Pratt didn't look up from his ledger. That's the schoolteacher. Don't look much like she's teaching. She ain't. Pratt set his pen down. Board voted her out on the platform yesterday afternoon. Fitch read a letter out loud in front of half the town and tore her contract up and let the pieces blow off down the tracks. Then he offered to buy her a ticket home like he was doing her a kindness. Caleb said nothing. She's got $4, Pratt said. I counted it with her. She didn't ask me to. What did the letter say? Said she was let go from a school in Missouri for moral cause. Pratt's jaw worked. Then she stood up in front of everybody and said, the moral cause was her dead sister's little girl, and she wouldn't say another word about it. And she ain't said another word about it, Caleb. Not to me. Not to the preacher. Woman could have cleared herself in about 9 seconds flat, and she wouldn't do it, and I've been sitting here since about midnight trying to work out why. Caleb Stone looked out the window at the platform. She wouldn't do it, he said, because the young'uns got to grow up here. Pratt was quiet a second. Well, he said, I hadn't got that far. Clara woke because someone was standing near her, and she came awake the way you do after a night on a bench in a town that doesn't want you all at once, with her arm already across the child. A man stood at the bottom of the steps. Tall, sun-dark, a leather coat over his arm because it was already too warm for it. He had his hat in his hand, which she noticed because nobody in Red Valley had taken their hat off to her yet. Ma'am. Sir. Didn't mean to startle you. You didn't. She sat up straighter. You did. Something happened at the corner of the man's mouth. It wasn't quite a smile. It was in the neighborhood. Caleb Stone. I run horses up past the North Ridge. Clara Winslow. I know it. Yes, Clara said. I expect everyone does by now. He turned his hat around once in his hands. Odell says you got $4. Mr. Pratt talks. Not usually. Clara looked at him. She had spent one afternoon and one night learning exactly what it meant when a man in this town walked up to her, and her voice came out harder than she meant. Mr. Stone, if you've come to tell me about the Thursday train the marshal's been, if you've come to tell me what the town thinks of me, I heard it yesterday, all of it standing up. And if you've come for some other reason—" She stopped and lifted her chin. "Then you can say that plain too, and I'll tell you no, and we'll both get on with our morning." The man went very still. Then he said quietly, "That ain't why I come." "No, no ma'am." He put his hat back on. "I come because I got an empty house, and you got a child sleeping on a bench, and them two facts been sitting in my head for about 20 minutes, and I can't get 'em to sit apart." Clara didn't answer for a long moment. "You don't know me," she said. "No." "You heard what Mr. Fitch read out." "I heard what Odell says you didn't say back." Caleb looked down the platform where a few white scraps of paper had caught against the base of the water barrel and were still there. "That's the part I come about. That's a thin reason to take a stranger into your house." "Ma'am, I've took in a horse that bit me twice on a thinner one." Clara laughed. It surprised her. It came up out of her raw and startled, and it broke on the end, and she put her hand over her mouth to stop it going somewhere else. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I haven't laughed in a while." "I ain't neither," Caleb Stone said. Nell woke then and sat up and looked at the tall man on the steps with her whole face. Clara's hand went to the child's shoulder without her thinking about it. "This is my niece, Nell." Caleb took his hat off again. "Miss Nell." Nell said nothing. "She doesn't speak," Clara said. "She hasn't since her mother passed. It's been 15 months. "All right." Clara waited for the rest of it. There was always a rest of it. "Have you seen a doctor? Have you tried making her? Is she simple? Is she willful?" She had heard every one of them from women in 3 states. "All right," she said. "Ma'am, I got a dog can't hear, and a mare won't cross water, and a hired man ain't strung 4 words together since Grant was president." Caleb straightened up. "I don't require nobody to talk." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Stone." "Ma'am." "Why?" He didn't pretend not to understand the question. He looked off at the ridge, and the muscle moved along his jaw, and Clara watched a thing go across that man's face that she recognized from her own mirror. "3 summers back," he said, "there was fever in this valley, diphtheria. Killed 9 children in 11 days. He said it flat, the way a man says a thing he has said to himself several thousand times. Board voted to close the Ridge Road. Quarantine. Nobody up, nobody down, and the doctor stayed in town where the numbers was." "Mr. Stone." "My wife was up that road," Caleb said. "And my boy." The platform was quiet. "I come down on the 12th of August and asked Harlan Fitch for the doctor, and he told me no. He told me he had 40 children in town, and 2 on the ridge, and he had to count." Caleb's hands hung open at his sides. "He counted right, I reckon. That's the hell of it, ma'am. I've had 3 years to work it out, and I can't make him wrong. I just can't make him right neither." Clara said very softly, "How old was he?" 4. "What was his name?" Caleb Stone looked at her, and something in his face came apart and went back together. "Thomas," he said. "Nobody's asked me that in 3 years." Boots came up the boardwalk then. 2 sets. Harlan Fitch had his gray coat on again in the morning heat, and Marshall Latimer was half a step behind him and looked like a man who'd rather be anywhere else in Montana territory. "Miss Winslow." Fitch stopped at the steps. Then he saw who was standing there. "Stone." "Fitch. Didn't know you were down." "Sold 4 head. Good." Fitch turned back to Clara like the other man had been a fence post. "Miss Winslow, the marshal tells me he spoke to you." "He did." "Then you understand the position." "I understand you'd like me gone by Thursday." "I'd like the ordinance observed," Fitch said. "And I'd like this town not to have to look at a woman sleeping on a public bench with a child, because there's people here who'll start feeling sorry, and sorry ain't a thing a town can afford." "There it is," Clara said. "Ma'am, that's the truest thing anybody in Red Valley has said to me. You're not afraid I'll ruin the children, Mr. Fitch. You're afraid somebody will be kind to me." Fitch's color came up. "You'll be on the Thursday train." "And if I'm not?" "Then the marshal will fine you $5 you have not got, and in September a judge will ask who's keeping that child, and I will be obliged to answer him honestly." The word honestly hung there in the hot morning air, and Clara Winslow felt the last of the ground go out from under her feet. She had held on through the platform, through the boarding house and the hotel and the church steps, through the night. She could not hold on through September. "Mr. Fitch," and her voice broke on it, and she hated herself for it. "Please." "Ma'am, she's 6 years old. She hasn't got anyone. If you take her to Helena, she will never say another word as long as she—" "That is not my—" "Please." And Caleb Stone said, "She ain't got no means, Fitch, because you tore her contract up in front of 40 people. That's a thing you did. Not weather, not God. You." Fitch turned. "This ain't your business, Stone." "No," Caleb agreed. "It ain't." "Then, but you and me have had a conversation before about who you can afford and who you can't." Caleb came up one step, and he didn't raise his voice, and somehow that was the worst part of it. "You recall that conversation?" Fitch's jaw set. "I recall it. You told me you had to count. I had 40 children in this town. I know what you had." Caleb's voice went quiet, and Latimer took a half-step sideways without seeming to know he'd done it. "I ain't arguing your arithmetic. I never have. But I'll tell you what I learnt about it Harlan standing on a mountain in August with a shovel." He came up the last step. "A man who counts long enough forgets there's people in the numbers." Nobody said anything. "You got one on that bench right now," Caleb said. "2." Fitch looked at the woman. He looked at the child. He looked at the platform boards for a while. When he raised his head, his voice had lost something. "You mean to take her up the ridge? If she'll go. Stone, that road is—" Fitch stopped himself, started over. "Folks will talk." "Folks talked yesterday," Caleb said. "Didn't cost 'em nothing." "There's a difference between talk and—" "There is," Caleb agreed. "Talk you can hear. What you did to her yesterday, a body carries that around quiet for 30 years. Harlan Fitch stood there in his good gray coat with the sweat running down under his collar, and for about 4 seconds, Clara saw the man behind the chairman, a man of 50-odd, who had buried children in this valley too, who had voted the Ridge Road closed and had to get up every morning of his life afterward and be the man who'd done it. Then he put the chairman back on. "The board's decision stands." "Nobody asked you to change it," Caleb said. "And the September judge will ask who's keeping that child," Caleb said. "And by September, there'll be an answer he can write down." Fitch's eyes narrowed. "Meaning what exactly?" "Meaning she'll have a roof and a name to put next to hers, and a man to stand up in a courthouse in Helena and say so out loud." Caleb Stone looked at Clara, and then back at Fitch, and his voice never went above the level of a man discussing the price of oats. "That's if the lady says yes. And she ain't said nothing yet, and I'd be obliged if you'd all quit talking over her like she's freight." They went. Fitch first, stiff-backed. Latimer looked back once from the corner and lifted 2 fingers off his hat brim at Clara, and she never did figure out what he meant by it. Then it was just the 2 of them, and the child, and the sun coming up hard. Clara stood with her arms wrapped around herself. "Mr. Stone." "Ma'am." "What did you just do?" "I run my mouth," Caleb said. "I ain't done it in 3 years, and I'm out of practice." "You told that man I'd have a name next to mine. I told him what'd stand up in a courthouse." He turned his hat in his hands again. "Ma'am, I ain't asking you nothing this morning. I want that plain between us. There's a room in my house with a bed and a window and a door with a bolt on the inside of it, and the bolt is on the inside on purpose. And I'll say it once, so you don't have to lie awake wondering." Clara's throat closed. "And the rest of it?" "The rest of it's September," Caleb said. "That's 9 weeks off. 9 weeks is a long time. Maybe by then you'll have a better road than me." "And if I don't?" "Then we'll go to Helena," he said, "and I'll stand up and say what needs saying, and after if you want shut of me, you'll be shut of me, and I'll not hold you to a word of it." Clara Winslow put her hand out and steadied herself on the bench. "I have to tell you something first," she said. "All right. My sister's name was Ruth. She was 19. The man who fathered Nell went to Colorado in October and never wrote. Clara's voice was perfectly level, and her hands were shaking. The town found out. The church found out. Ruth had that child in a back room with only me there, and there wasn't a woman in that whole city would come and help her, and she lived another 5 years being what they called her. And when the fever took her, she was so tired, Mr. Stone. She was so tired that she stopped. I could have said all that yesterday, she said. On this platform. I could have said it and they'd have given me back the school. I've thought about it every hour since. Why didn't you? Because Nell is going to be 16 someday, Clara said, and this valley remembers everything. Caleb Stone stood there. Ma'am, he said at last, I've had 3 years to figure out what I believe about people, and I ain't got much. But I'll tell you one thing I know for certain sure. What's that? There ain't but a handful of folks alive would trade a roof for a youngin's name, he said, and I'm looking at one of 'em. She said yes, not right off. She stood there a while with the sun climbing and the $4.60 in her pocket, and then she looked down at the child sitting on the bench with the horse blanket still around her shoulders, and Nell was watching the tall man, and Nell had not taken her eyes off him one time since he'd said Miss Nell and meant it. All right, Clara said. All right. 9 weeks. 9 weeks, Caleb agreed. He bent and picked up the leather suitcase, and Clara reached for it out of habit, and then made herself let it go, which was, she thought later, the hardest single thing she did that entire summer. Odell Pratt came out onto the platform and watched them go down the steps, and he called out, Caleb. Odell. Blanket's hers. I'll see it's returned. I said it's hers, Pratt said, and went back inside and shut the door hard. The wagon was at the stock pens. Caleb put the suitcase in the bed and then turned and put his hands out for the child and stopped and looked at Clara first. Ma'am. And Clara Winslow, who had not let one living soul touch that little girl in 15 months, heard herself say, go on. Caleb Stone lifted Nell up onto the seat like she was made out of eggshell and set her down in the middle and climbed up on the far side, and Clara came up on the near side, and there they were 3 people on a wagon seat who had been strangers 90 minutes before. He took up the lines. Then he sat a moment, looking at the road north out of Red Valley, the road that ran up to the ridge. The road with the 2 graves at the top of it, the road a school board had voted shut on the 11th of August 3 summers gone. Mr. Stone. Ma'am. Are we going? Caleb Stone let his breath out. Ain't been up this road with anybody riding beside me, he said, since the last time. Clara looked at his hands on the lines. They weren't steady either. She said, then we'll go slow, and a small hand came over and took hold of 2 of the cowboy's fingers and held on. Caleb Stone looked down at it for a long moment. Then he clucked to the team, and the wagon rolled north, and behind them, the last scraps of a torn-up contract lifted off the boards of the Red Valley Depot and went out over the rails and were gone. The road north out of Red Valley climbed for 4 miles before it did anything else, and for the first 2 of them, nobody on that wagon seat said a word. Clara counted her own breathing. It was a thing she had learned to do in St. Louis in the last year when she had gone into rooms full of people who had already decided about her. Mr. Stone. Ma'am. How far is it? 11 mile. Takes better than 3 hours with a wagon. 3 hours. It's a bad road on purpose, Caleb said. Man who built it didn't want company. Was that you? It was. Clara looked at her hands. And now you're hauling company up it. I noticed that. Nell had not let go of his 2 fingers. She had shifted so her shoulder was against his arm, and Clara watched it happen out of the corner of her eye and did not know what to do with the feeling it gave her. 15 months. 15 months of women in 3 states putting out their hands, and this child stepping back into Clara's skirts like a hand going into a pocket. She's not usually like this, Clara said. Like what? Near anybody. Caleb shifted the lines to his other hand so that the girl wouldn't have to let go. Well, he said, she ain't near anybody. She's near me. That's a different thing, and I couldn't tell you why. They came around the shoulder of the ridge at the third hour, and Caleb stopped the team without being asked to, and Clara understood why before she saw it, because a man's back tells you things. There were 2 markers up on the bench of grass above the road, one long and one very short. "Mr. Stone, you'd have found him in a week," he said. "Rather you found him with me sitting here than by yourself with a bucket in your hand." "I'm sorry. Folks say that." "I know they do." "You said it different," Caleb said, and clucked to the team, and they went on. The house was smaller than she expected, and better built than she expected, and there was a man sitting on the step of it with a rifle across his knees, who stood up when the wagon came in and did not put the rifle down. "Amos, Caleb. This here's Miss Winslow, and Miss Nell." Amos Deal was about 60 and looked like something left out in the weather on purpose. He looked at Clara for 4 full seconds. "You the school teacher they run off?" "Amos," Caleb said. "I am," Clara said. "Huh." Amos leaned the rifle against the doorframe. "Well, they run me off a place in Nebraska in '68. Beans is on." And he went inside, and that was the whole of Clara Winslow's welcome to the Stone Ranch, and she stood there in the yard with her heart going, and thought that it was by a considerable distance the kindest thing anybody had said to her since Missouri. The room had a bed and a window and a door, and the bolt was on the inside exactly as he'd said it would be, and Caleb set the suitcase down and stepped back out into the hall before she'd even got the lamp lit. "Mr. Stone." "Ma'am, you don't have to stand in the hall." "I reckon I do," Caleb said. 9 weeks is a long time. Ain't nothing on this ranch worth spending it wrong." He was gone before she could answer. Clara sat down on the edge of the bed. Nell climbed up beside her and put her head against her arm, and for a while there was nothing in the world but the 2 of them and a lamp, and then Clara said out loud to the ceiling, "What in God's name have I done?" She got up at 4 the next morning because she had never in her life been able to sleep in a house where she hadn't yet earned the bed. Amos found her at the stove. "That's my job. You can have it back tomorrow." "That's what a body says the first day. Mr. Deal." Clara turned around with the spoon in her hand. "I have $4.60 and no place to be. If I sit in that room being a guest for 9 weeks, I will lose my mind and you will have to shoot me. So please let me have the stove." Amos considered this. "Coffee's in the blue tin," he said. "Don't move the tin." By 6, she had found out what kind of outfit it was. 61 head of horses on a bench of grass a mile above the house. 2 men, 1 dog that couldn't hear thunder, and a set of books on the shelf by the window that had not been added up since the spring. By 7, she had found out something else. "Mr. Stone." Caleb was at the corral with his forearms on the top rail. "Ma'am?" "That sorrel's got a wire cut on the near hind." He looked at her. "She's had it since Sunday. It's proud flesh now. It'll be worse by Friday." Amos poured turpentine on it. Amos should be ashamed of himself. Behind her, Amos said, "I heard that." "You were meant to," Clara said. "Mr. Stone, do you have carbolic or do you not?" Caleb turned all the way around and put his back against the rail and folded his arms. "Ma'am, where'd you learn horses?" "My father ran 200 head in Kansas until he didn't. I doctored every one of them from the time I was 9 because he couldn't pay a man to." She held out her hand. "Carbolic. And a clean rag, not the one hanging in the barn that one's been on a saddle." There was a silence. "Amos," Caleb said. "I'm going," Amos said. God Almighty. It took 40 minutes, and it was ugly, and the mare fought her twice, and Clara talked to it the whole time in a low, steady voice that never once went up, and when it was done, she stood up with blood on her forearms to the elbow and found the 2 men looking at her. "What?" "Nothing," Caleb said. "Say it." "I was thinking," he said, "that Harlan Fitch tore up a contract on a woman who could have saved this outfit $100 a year, and he done it because of a letter. He did it because of a child." "He did it," Caleb said, "because he never asked one question. Man tore up your paper before he found out you could put a hand on a horse." Clara washed her arms in the trough and did not trust herself to answer. It was the 4th day when Nell followed the dog. Clara came out with the wash and the child was gone, and there is a specific cold that goes through a woman at that moment, and she was halfway to the creek at a dead run when Amos caught her arm. Yonder. Nell was sitting in the barn doorway with her hand flat on Pilot's ribs. "She's been there an hour," Amos said. "I've been watching. She figured out he don't hear. She's been thumping the floor with her heel so he knows where she's at. Little thing worked that out by herself in about 10 minutes. Clara put her hand over her mouth. "Ma'am, she used to talk more than any child I ever knew," Clara said. "She'd talk to a fence post. She'd talk in her sleep. And then her mother died, and it went off like a lamp." Amos chewed on that. "Well," he said, "dog don't hear, and she don't talk. Way I see it, them two got the best arrangement on this place." Caleb came in at dusk, and Clara met him at the corral gate, and told him, and he listened all the way through without saying anything, and then he said, "Does she cry?" "No. That's the part I'd worry on." "That's the part I do worry on." "Then we'll get her a horse," Caleb said. "She's 6 years old." "Ma'am, I was 4. The horse he brought down for her was an ancient bay mare with a dropped back and one wall eye, and Caleb led her into the yard and did not lift Nell up and did not ask her if she wanted to. He just handed the child the lead rope, put it in her hand, and closed her fingers on it, and walked off to the barn and left her standing there with 3/4 of a ton of horse on the end of a rope. "Mr. Stone, leave her." "She's—" "Ma'am." He didn't stop walking. "Everybody in that child's life has done things for her since her mama died. She's 6. She knows the difference between being took care of and being trusted." Clara stood in the yard with her fists closed and watched her sister's daughter hold a horse. Nell held it for an hour and 10 minutes. She would not put it away. When Amos finally came and asked her for the rope, she gave it up like a soldier handing over a flag. That night at supper, the child ate everything on her plate, which she had not done since Bismarck, and afterward, she got down and walked around the table and stood at Caleb's elbow until he looked at her. Then she put her hand flat on the back of his hand and left it there for the space of about 3 breaths and went to bed. Nobody at that table said anything for a while. "Mr. Stone." "Ma'am." "Your hand is shaking." "I'm aware of it," Caleb said, and got up and went outside, and Clara heard the barn door and then nothing for a long time. The first riders came up the ridge road on the 11th day. Clara had the washout and heard them and knew from the sound that it was more than one horse, and she was inside with the door half shut before she thought about it, which told her something about herself she didn't much care for. There were 3 of them, and they didn't get down. Stone. Wade. Fitch sent us to say there's a stock inspection Monday. There ain't no stock inspection in July. There is this year. Caleb stood in the yard with his thumbs in his belt. That the whole message. The one called Wade looked past him at the house. "Folks in town are saying she's up here." "Folks in town are right. They're saying more than that. I expect they are." "Ain't you going to ask what—" "No," Caleb said. Wade's face worked. "My wife wants to know, is she keeping house, or is she—" "Wade." Caleb's voice didn't change at all. "You come up my road to say a word to me about a woman. Go on and say it so I know what kind of morning we're having." The other 2 shifted their horses. "Ain't nothing," Wade said. "Then you rode 11 mile for nothing, and you'll ride 11 back the same way, and you can tell your wife I said the road's open, and she's welcome to come see for herself." They went. Clara came out onto the step. "You should have let them say it." "Why?" "Because they'll say it anyway in town where I can't hear it, and it'll be worse for having been swallowed." Caleb turned around. "Ma'am, I ain't a clever man. You're the 2nd cleverest man I've met in Montana Territory, and the first one's dead." That stopped him. "Odell Pratt," Clara said. "I mean Mr. Pratt. He's not dead. I meant—" She put her hand up. "I don't know what I meant. I'm sorry. You're wore out." "I'm terrified," Clara said. "There's a difference, and I've had both, and I know which one this is." He came over to the step and stood there with his hat in his hands. "Of Fitch, of September." She sat down on the step because her legs had decided it for her. "Mr. Stone, I've done nothing but count since the day we came up here. 9 weeks. Then 8. There are 39 days left, and I've been living every one of them twice, once when it happens, and once at 2 in the morning. Ma'am, and the worst of it is, I'm happy. She said it like a confession. She held a rope for an hour. She ate her supper. She put her hand on you. And every good thing that happens up here makes September worse, because there'll be more to lose out of me when it comes. Caleb sat down on the step. Not close. 2 feet of board between them. Can I say a thing that'll sound hard? Please. You've been carrying that young'un since her mama died, and you ain't set her down once. I can't set her down. I ain't saying set her down. I'm saying let somebody else get a hand under her. He looked out at the corral. There's 2 of us on this place, don't sleep good. You and me. And I've had 3 years of it, and I'll tell you what it costs and what it don't buy if you want to hear it, but not on a day you're this tired. Clara wiped her face with the back of her wrist. What does it buy? Nothing, Caleb said. Not one thing. I'd have took a partner in it, and there wasn't one to take. Adeline Fitch came up the ridge road alone on the 16th day, driving a buggy. She plainly did not know how to drive and got down in the yard with her hands shaking so hard she dropped the reins twice. Mrs. Fitch. Miss Winslow. The woman looked at the house and the barn, and the child sitting in the barn door with the dog. Oh, she said. Oh, she's got color in her. Ma'am, what are you doing here? Adeline Fitch reached into her bag and pulled out a paper, and she held it against her chest with both hands like it was trying to get away from her. I took this out of my husband's desk, she said. Mrs. Fitch. 29 years I've been that man's wife, and I never once opened a drawer of his. Her chin was going. Miss Winslow, I want you to understand, I am not a brave woman. I'm not. I've laid awake 11 nights. Ma'am, sit down. No, if I sit down, I'll not get up again. She pushed it out. Read it. Clara took it. It was a letter from the office of the superintendent of schools city of St. Louis, Missouri, and it was the letter Harlan Fitch had held up on the platform, and it opened the way such letters open. In reply to your inquiry of the 11th of May concerning Miss Clara Winslow. The 11th of May, Clara said. Yes. I signed my contract in March. Yes, Adeline said. They asked about me in May. Clara's hands had gone cold on the paper. I was already hired. I'd already given up my room. What in God's name did they want with, turn it over? Clara turned it over. The letter of inquiry had been folded inside, and it was on Red Valley School Board stationery, and it asked 6 questions about the character and conduct of Miss Clara Winslow, formerly of the 2nd Ward School, and it was signed at the bottom in a hand Clara had been reading since February. Y.R. Obedient Servant, Emmett Dowd, Treasurer. Clara sat down on the edge of the buggy step after all. Mr. Dowd, she said. Yes. Mr. Dowd wrote me 40 letters. I know it. He wrote me about the school and the town, and what the winters were like, and whether I liked music. Clara heard her own voice climbing and could not stop it. He wrote me that he hoped very much that I would find Red Valley worth staying in. He wrote me that in April, ma'am, and in May he sat down and wrote to St. Louis to ask what was wrong with me. Adeline Fitch's face crumpled. He wasn't hiring a teacher, Clara said. No. He was looking at a wife. I was 39 years old, and he'd never had a woman answer him, Adeline said. He'd been writing to that school in Missouri about a stove and a slate order, and a young lady wrote him back who was clever and could spell, and he made a whole life out of it in his head. My husband knew. Harlan knew and thought it was funny. He thought, he said, Emmett'll have a bride, and the county'll have a teacher, and it'll cost us 1 salary. And then the letter came. And then the letter came, Adeline said, and Emmett Dowd found out there was a child and Miss Winslow. She was crying now and not bothering to stop. He did not come to my husband and say, let's not have her. He came to my husband and said, let's have it read out on the platform. Clara sat very still. Why? Because the whole town knew he'd been writing, Adeline said. Because 2 of the ladies had already asked him when the wedding would be. Because if she came off that train and he simply didn't marry her, everybody in Red Valley would have said Emmett Dowd got refused. So he ruined me in public. So nobody could ever say he was the one turned down. Clara looked at the paper in her hands for a long moment. Then she said quite calmly, "Mrs. Fitch, I want you to get in that buggy and go home." "Miss Winslow, you have done a brave thing, and I'll not have it cost you. Go home. If he asks where you were at the Devers." "I can't lie to." "You can and you will," Clara said, "because I have been the woman that everybody was sorry for and could not help, and I would rather be that woman again than watch you go home and be punished for it." Adeline Fitch put both hands over her mouth. "There's one more thing," she said, "and I'd not have come up this road for the letter alone. Ma'am, he's filed on the child." Everything in Clara went perfectly quiet. "What? Emmett, not September." Adeline was talking fast now, getting it out before her courage went. "He went to Helena himself on the 15th. He's filed a complaint with the county that there's a minor child in this county in the care of a woman with no legal claim and no means and no character, and he's asked the court to appoint. The judge sits the 14th of August. That's 23 days. Yes, 23 days. Miss Winslow, listen to me." Adeline grabbed her wrist. "He does not want that little girl. Do you understand me? He does not want her. He wants you to get on a train, because as long as you're 11 miles up a mountain, living in Caleb Stone's house, every soul in Red Valley is reminded once a day that Emmett Dowd wrote 40 letters to a woman who'd sooner sleep on a bench." Caleb had come up from the corral. Clara had not heard him. "Say that last part again," he said. Adeline Fitch looked up at him, and it was plain she was frightened of him, and plain she was going to say it anyway. "He's filed on the child, Mr. Stone, the 14th of August." Caleb took his hat off very slowly and turned it around one time in his hands and put it back on. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm obliged to you. More'n I can put words to. You get on home now, and if Harlan asks, you was at the Devers." "That's what she said." "Well," Caleb said, "then it's likely true. They stood in the yard a long time after the buggy went down." 23 days, Clara said. "I heard it. Mr. Stone, I have to think." "Then think out loud, because I ain't going to be much use quiet." "If I run—" She was walking now, back and forth, the letter still in her fist. "If I take her tonight and go, we're on a train Thursday, and they can't serve a paper on a woman in Wyoming. That's the first thing." "That's the first thing," Caleb agreed. "And I'll have $4 and no position, and a child who's just started eating again, and I'll be the woman who ran, and it'll follow us to whatever town we stop in, because it always does, because somebody always writes a letter." Her voice cracked. "Somebody always writes a letter, ma'am. And if I stay, I go into a courtroom in Helena on the 14th of August, and a judge asks me what I have, and I say I have nothing, and he takes her." Clara stopped walking. "He takes her, Mr. Stone. And she doesn't talk. She hasn't talked in 15 months. What do you think happens to a child who doesn't talk in a county home?" Caleb didn't answer that one. "Say something." "I'm thinking on what you've got." "I've got nothing. That's what I've been saying." "You've got a witness," Caleb said. Clara stopped. "That letter in your hand ain't nothing, ma'am. That's a member of the Red Valley School Board writing to Missouri in May to dig up dirt on a woman he'd been courting by post and then reading it out on a public platform. A judge might not care what a town thinks of you, but there ain't a judge in this territory won't sit up straight when a man's motive comes out crooked. And who takes the stand to say it, Adeline Fitch, against her own husband?" Clara shook her head hard. No, I won't. That woman drove a buggy up a mountain she doesn't know how to drive. I'll not put her in a courtroom." "Then we find another road." "There isn't." "There's one." Caleb said it quietly. "You know there's one. You've known it since the depot, ma'am, same as me, and we've both been walking around it for 2 weeks like a hole in the floor." Clara turned away from him. "Don't. You want me to not say it." "I want you to not say it because you're kind," she said. "I want you to not say it because there are 2 markers on that hill, and I've seen you look at them every single evening at the same hour. And don't tell me you don't, because I've counted. 16 evenings. 16. The silence went on a long time. Her name was Marion, Caleb said. Clara closed her eyes. I ain't said it out loud since the funeral, not one time. Amos won't say it because he thinks it'll hurt me, and I won't say it because I think it'll hurt me, and between the two of us, that woman's been 3 years without her own name, spoke on the place she lived. He took a breath. That's what I done with grieving, ma'am. That's the whole of my accomplishment. Mr. Stone, they was 11 days dying, both of 'em. And I got a mile down that road, and I got 2 mile, and the 4th time I come down to Fitch's door, he had Latimer standing on the step with a scattergun and a rope across the road at the ford. Caleb's voice had gone flat and level and terrible. And I want you to hear me on this next part, because it's the part nobody in that town knows, and I've never told it. I could have rode through. That was 1 man and 1 rope. I sat that horse, and I done the arithmetic, and I knew I could go through Boone Latimer if I was willing to be a man who'd done that. And you weren't. I wasn't, Caleb said. I turned around, and they was dead in 9 days, and I have laid awake 3 years asking myself whether I turned around because I was a decent man, or because I was afraid, and I ain't never once been able to answer it. Clara turned around. You were decent. You don't know that. I know that a man who was afraid doesn't build the road worse on purpose, so nobody comes up it, Clara said. A man who was afraid runs. You stayed 11 miles from the 2 graves and looked at them every night at the same hour for 3 years. Mr. Stone, and that is not what cowards do. That's a sentence. You've been serving a sentence. Caleb Stone stood in his own yard and could not speak. So no, Clara said. I won't have you say it. Not for me and not for her. You don't get to spend the rest of your life paying a debt you don't owe, and you certainly don't get to pay it to a woman who showed up on your platform with $4. I'd have took her anyway. What? The child. Caleb's jaw was working. If it had been a man on that bench with a young'un, I'd have brung him up too. You keep telling me what I'm doing it for, and you keep getting it a little bit wrong, and I've let it go twice now. Then say what you're doing it for. I'm doing it, Caleb said, because on the 12th of August 3 years back, I asked a town for one thing, and it counted me, and come up short. And I swore standing on that hill with a shovel that if ever I was the one being asked, I would not count. Clara put her hands over her face. When she took them down, her voice had changed. How many days? 23. And a marriage on the ridge performed by Reverend Ames in front of that town would give her a name to write on a paper, Caleb said, and a roof with a deed under it, and 2 people to swear to instead of 1. And it would be a lie. Would it? Clara looked up at him. Ma'am, Caleb said, I ain't asking you to love me. I'd think less of a woman who could do it in 16 days on a mountain out of fright. What I'm asking is whether you can stand up in front of a preacher and say a thing you mean. And do you mean it? I mean that there's a child on this place that put her hand on the back of mine, Caleb said, and I've slept every night since, first time in 3 years, and I ain't going to stand here and pretend that don't come into it. Amos Deal had come out on the step at some point and stood there, and neither of them had noticed. For what it's worth, he said. It ain't worth nothing, Amos. For what it's worth, Amos repeated. I've been on this place 4 years, and I dug them 2 graves with my own hands, and I'll say this, and then I'll shut up for a month. That boy'd have liked her. He pointed his chin at the barn. Thomas would have liked her. He was a talker. He'd have talked enough for the both of 'em. Then he went inside and shut the door, and did not come out again that evening. Clara sat down on the step. I want to tell you what I'm afraid of, she said. Because if we're going to do this, you should know the shape of it. Go on. When Ruth was carrying Nell, a man came to our house, a widower. He said he'd marry her and give the baby his name. He was 51 years old, and he had a face like a closed door, and my sister was 19 and frightened, and she said yes. Clara's hands were flat on her knees. And she cried for 3 nights, and on the 4th morning she went and told him no. And after that, there wasn't a door in that city open to her, and 5 years later she died. And I have thought about that man every day of my life, Mr. Stone. Every day. Because if she'd said yes, she'd have been alive, and she'd have been the property of a man with a face like a closed door, and I have never once been able to decide which I'd have wanted for her. Ma'am. So you understand what I'm asking when I ask it, Clara said. Am I saving her, or am I doing what that man did? Am I trading a child's name for a woman's life, because I've spent one night on a bench and I found out something about myself I'd rather not have known, which is that after 4 hours on that bench, I would have said yes to almost anything. Caleb Stone sat down on the step beside her, 2 feet of board between them, same as always. Then here's how you'll know, he said. How? Because I ain't going to ask you. He put his hat down on the boards. I'll not do it. Not tonight, not the day before the 14th, not standing in a courthouse hall with a clock going. If it gets asked in this house, it'll get asked by the one of us that ain't got a train ticket and a marshal and a judge pushing at her back. That's you. And if you never ask it, then come the 14th I will ride to Helena with you anyhow, and stand up and say every word I've got married or not. And if they take her, they'll take her over my testimony, and not for the want of it. Clara stared at him. That's the most foolish thing I ever heard a man say. Likely. You'd throw away the one thing that'd work. I'd throw away the one thing that'd work, Caleb agreed, before I'd have you lay awake at 50 years old wondering if a mountain and a marshal picked your husband for you. Clara Winslow began to laugh, and it turned over into crying somewhere in the middle, and she put both hands over her face and let it go for about 30 seconds, which was 26 seconds longer than she had let anything go since Missouri. When she was done, she wiped her face and sat up straight. Mr. Stone. Ma'am. I have a question, and I want a plain answer. All right. On the platform before you knew about the letter, before Mrs. Fitch, before any of this, when you stood there and told Harlan Fitch I'd have a name next to mine, what were you thinking? Caleb was quiet a moment. I was thinking, he said, that I'd seen a woman get down on her knees on public boards to pick up paper that wasn't worth nothing, and that in 3 years of not going to town, I had not seen one single thing I couldn't live without seeing until that. Clara sat with that. Then she stood up. She stood up and stepped down off the step and turned around so that she was looking at him straight on, and her hands were shaking so badly she put them behind her. Caleb Stone. He got to his feet. Ma'am, I'm not frightened right now, Clara said. I want that on the record because it's going to matter to me later. The marshal isn't here. The judge is 23 days off. I have eaten supper and slept in a bed with a bolt on the inside of the door for 16 nights, and you have never once come near it. So I am not asking you out of fear, and I want you to look at me while I say the rest of it, because I have only got the nerve for it one time. Caleb Stone looked at her. Marry me, Clara said, and from the barn doorway where a 6-year-old girl had been sitting all that while with her hand flat on a deaf dog's ribs. There came a sound that neither of them had heard in 15 months. It was small. It was hoarse from disuse. It cracked in the middle like a boy's voice, but every soul on that ridge heard it. Yes. Nobody moved. Clara turned around so slowly, it was like a woman turning around in water, and the child was standing in the barn door with one hand still flat on the dog's ribs, and the other one closed into a fist at her side. Nell. The girl didn't say it again. Nell, honey. Clara got about 4 steps, and then her knees gave out, and she went down in the dirt of the yard, and Nell came to her at a dead run, and the two of them held on to each other in a way that Amos Deal afterward said he had no business having witnessed and had watched every second of anyway. Say it again, Clara said. Please, just once more. Say anything, say a word, say my... Nell didn't. That's all right? Clara had her hands on either side of the child's face. That's all right. That's all right. You don't have to. But the girl's mouth was working. Everybody could see it working. She had the look of somebody trying to lift a thing that had been sitting on her a long while, and she got about halfway, and then her face came apart, and she pushed it into Clara's shoulder and stayed there. 15 months, Clara said over the top of her head. 15 months, and it was one word. It was the right one, Caleb said. Amos Deal blew his nose like a steamboat and went inside. Clara looked up. You never answered me. I know it. I asked you a thing in front of your hired man and God, and I'm still down here in the dirt waiting on it. Caleb came and got down on one knee and put his hand under her elbow and helped her up, and he did not let go of the elbow when she was up. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "And I'll say the rest of it now while I've got the nerve same as you did. I'd have said yes on the platform. I've known it since Odell told me what you wouldn't say. And I've spent 16 days making myself walk slow on account of I didn't want to be another man collecting a woman with nowhere to go. You could have told me. I could have. Then you'd have been living in my house knowing it with a bolt on the door and 9 weeks to get through, and there'd have been no way on this earth for you to know what was you and what was the bench." Clara looked at him a while. "You're a great deal more careful with me than anybody's ever been," she said, "and I don't know what to do with it." "Get used to it," Caleb said. "It don't wear off." They set it for the second Sunday. That gave them 19 days before the 14th of August and a margin of 10. And Amos said 10 days of margin in Montana Territory was the same as none at all, and he'd thank them to hurry. It was Amos, too, who asked the question that took the floor out from under the whole thing. He asked it at supper with his fork in the air. "Who's got the license book?" "Reverend Ames'll." "Ames can say the words," Amos said. "Ames can't issue paper. Territory says you got to have a license out of the county clerk before a preacher can lawful marry you, and if you ain't got it, the marriage don't stand. And if the marriage don't stand, then come the 14th. You two are exactly where you was. Only you'll have made a fool of yourselves in front of the whole valley besides. Then we'll go get the license. That's what I'm getting at." Amos put the fork down. "Who do you reckon keeps the license book for this end of the county?" Nobody said anything. "Deputy Clerk of Lewis and Clark County for the Red Valley District," Amos said, "is Emmett Dowd." The lamp hissed. "He's the treasurer," Clara said. "He's the treasurer and the deputy clerk, and he keeps the tax roll on account of ain't nobody else in that town can do sums and hold a pen at the same time." Amos looked at the two of them. "The man that filed on your young'un has got the book you need in his desk drawer." Clara set her cup down very carefully, because if she had not set it down carefully, she would have thrown it. "He'll refuse." "He can't refuse outright," Caleb said. "There's a law. He can lose it," Amos said. "He can send it to Helena for rebinding. He can be at his sister's in Deer Lodge for 2 weeks. He can be sick." Sonny. "I have watched little men with drawers full of paper my whole life, and there ain't a one of 'em couldn't stop a wagon with nothing but a drawer." Caleb rode down the next morning. He was back at 4 in the afternoon, and Clara knew before he got off the horse. "Say it." "Book's gone to Helena." "For rebinding." "For rebinding. When does it come back?" 6 to 8 weeks, he says. Maybe 10. Depends on the bindery." Clara stood there in the yard with her arms folded. "Did he look at you when he said it?" "He looked right at me," Caleb said, "and he was sweating, and he said it twice without me asking twice." "What did you say?" "I said thank you kindly, and I come home." "You what?" Caleb pulled the saddle off and set it on the rail. "Ma'am, if I'd have leaned on Emmett Dowd in his own office with the window open on Main Street, then come the 14th of August, his lawyer stands up in Helena and says, 'The man who wants this child has already been threatened in public by a mountain rancher with a temper. I've thought about it 11 mile down and 11 mile back.'" He turned around. "I ain't giving that man one single thing to write down." Clara let her breath out. "That's the second time you've been smarter than me in a week, and I'd be obliged if you'd stop." "It ain't smart. It's just I've been on the wrong end of a man's paperwork before." "Then I'll go." "Ma'am." "He didn't write 40 letters to you," Clara said. She went in on the Thursday in the wagon with her hair up and her one good collar on, and Amos beside her with a rifle under the seat that everybody agreed nobody would mention. The office was at the back of the Mercantile, and Emmett Dowd was at his desk, and when he looked up and saw who was standing in his doorway, his whole face went the color of tallow. "Miss Winslow." "Mr. Dowd." He got up. Then he sat back down. Then he got up again, and Clara watched a 39-year-old man forget entirely how a body is supposed to work. "I understood that as Mr. Stone came in." "He did. You told him the license book had gone to Helena." "It has." "When?" The 11th." "The 11th." Clara stepped into the room and closed the door behind her, and she saw him flinch at the sound of it. Mr. Dowd, on the 11th of the month, I was still counting days on a mountain and had no more notion of marrying anybody than of flying. Nobody in this county knew there'd be a license wanted on the 11th. Not Reverend Ames. Not Mr. Stone. Not me. Dowd's mouth opened. So either you sent the book to Helena the very week I decided a thing I hadn't decided yet, Clara said, or you sent it the day after Mrs. Fitch came up my road. Mrs. Fitch, Dowd said, has been careful, has been indiscreet. She's been the only Christian in Red Valley, Clara said. Mr. Dowd, I've come to ask you one question, and then I'll go, and I want you to understand, I'm not asking it to shame you. There isn't a soul out in that street. Just us. Miss Winslow, you wrote to me for 4 months. He sat down. You wrote me about the stove and the slate order, Clara said. And then you wrote me about the winters, and then you wrote me about music. You asked, did I care for music? I've got that letter in my suitcase 11 miles up a mountain. Mr. Dowd, and I've had it out and read it twice since I came here, and I have not been able to work out how the man who wrote it is the man who stood on that platform. Emmett Dowd put both hands flat on his desk. I didn't stand on the platform, he said. Harlan read it. You wrote to St. Louis. Yes. In May. Yes. Why? And the thing that came out of that man was not what she had ridden down the mountain to hear. Because I couldn't believe it, Emmett Dowd said. Sir, you wrote me back. He wasn't looking at her. Everyone. 11 days out and 11 days home, and every single one you wrote me back, and you spelled my name right, and you asked me things. Nobody's asked me a thing since my mother died. His hands had started to shake, and he pressed them flatter. And a man gets to be 39 in a town of 400, and the ladies is all polite to him, and he knows what polite is. So I sat here in June with a stack of letters from a woman in Missouri who was clever and kind and coming here, and I thought there's something wrong with this. There's got to be something wrong with this. Because there ain't nothing right that comes to Emmett Dowd through the mail. Clara did not say anything. So I wrote and asked, he said, and they told me. And you had it read out in front of 40 people. I did not want it read out. Mrs. Fitch says you asked for it. Mrs. Fitch? He stopped. He rubbed his face with both hands. Yes, all right, yes, I asked for it. Say why? Because they knew, Dowd said, and his voice broke wide open on it. Because Mabel Deaver asked me in April when the wedding would be. Because Harlan called me a bridegroom at the January meeting in front of 11 men. The whole valley knew Emmett Dowd was writing to a lady, and if you come off that train and I said no thank you, then it's Emmett Dowd being particular. But if you come off that train and there's a letter... He couldn't finish it. Then it's Emmett Dowd being wronged, Clara said. Yes. You bought yourself a story with my life. Yes. And now you've filed on a 6-year-old child. Emmett Dowd looked up, and Clara saw it come into his face, the thing she'd been afraid of. The whole ride down, the moment where a small man stops being ashamed and starts being cornered. I'll tell you what I'll do, he said. Mr. Dowd, there's a home in Helena that's clean. It's clean. Miss Winslow, I've seen the reports. I audit the county's payment on it. 22 children and a matron with references. He leaned forward. You put her there, and I'll withdraw the complaint, and the board will reinstate you inside a week, and in the fall when the talks died. Don't. There's no reason a decent woman and a decent man couldn't. Don't. I would be good to you, Emmett Dowd said. The room was very quiet. Clara stood there and heard as clear as if the woman were standing at her shoulder. Her sister Ruth, at 19 years old, saying, He says he'll give the baby his name. Clara, he says he'll give it his name, and crying 3 nights and going on the 4th morning to tell a man with a face like a closed door, no. Mr. Dowd, she said, how old are you? I'm 39. My sister was 19. A man offered her a name for her child. She said no, and it killed her by inches over 5 years, and I have spent every day since wondering whether I should have made her say yes. Clara's voice was perfectly steady. And I want to thank you, sir, because you have just settled that for me forever. Miss Winslow. She was right to refuse you. Both of you. All of you. Clara put her hand on the doorknob. The license book, Mr. Dowd. It's in Helena. Is it? It is in Helena. Then I'll go to Helena, Clara said, and I'll ask the clerk there when he received it, and what date is on his receiving stamp, and I'll bring that answer back and put it in front of Judge Whitcomb on the 14th of August, alongside a letter of inquiry dated the 11th of May. And you may take a moment, sir, to consider how that will sound, read out loud in a room full of people. Emmett Dowd went white to the lips. You wouldn't. I've had a paper read out about me in front of 40 people, Clara said. I know exactly how it's done. She was 2 steps out the door when he said her name. Miss Winslow. She stopped. It's in the bottom drawer, Emmett Dowd said. She didn't turn around. There's a fee, he said. It's $2. I'd not want it said I made it easy. You'll get your $2, Mr. Dowd. Miss Winslow. What? Was there ever? He stopped. Started over smaller. In them letters. Before. Was there ever a minute of it that was? Clara stood in that doorway a long moment with her back to him, and afterward, she was glad of what she said, because there had been enough cruelty in Red Valley that summer to last it 100 years. You write a good letter, Mr. Dowd, she said. It was the best thing that happened to me all spring. I hope to God you write another one someday to somebody, and I hope you have the sand to let her off the train. Then she went out through the mercantile with her chin up past 4 women who stopped talking when she came through and started again before the door shut, and got up on the wagon seat beside Amos Deal with $2 gone out of her $4.60 and a folded license in her hand. Amos looked at her. Well, drive, Clara said, before I'm sick in the street. Harlan Fitch found out about his wife on the Saturday. He found out because Emmett Dowd, having lost his book and his nerve in the same hour, went straight to the Fitch house and told him, and Adeline Fitch was standing in the hall with a dish towel when her husband came out of his own front room and asked her whether she had been in his desk. She said yes. She told Clara about it afterward, and she told it flat the way people tell things they've decided not to be ashamed of. He said 29 years. I said, I know how long it's been, Harlan, I was there for all of it. And he said, do you know what you've done? And I said, I know exactly what I've done, and I'd do it again on Tuesday. Mrs. Fitch. And he sat down in his chair, Adeline said, and he said the strangest thing. He said, it was the 11th of August. Clara went still. I didn't know what he meant. I said what was Harlan, and he said, the day I closed the road, it was the 11th. Everybody in this town says the 12th. Stone says the 12th. I've heard him say it. It was the 11th, Addie, and I've never corrected a soul, because if it was the 11th, then I closed it a day before the Kelso boy took sick, and if it was the 12th, then I closed it after, and any man will tell you a fever that's already in a house. She had to stop. Mrs. Fitch. He's been carrying a day, Adeline said. 1 day, 3 years. He's built the whole of his character on a day that ain't the day. And his own? Our Peter was 8. Adeline said. He was the 6th of the 9. He died on the 19th of August with the road closed and the doctor in town and everything. My husband voted for all of it working exactly the way he said it would. Clara sat down. He'd never forgive me telling you that. Then why did you? Because you're going into a courtroom in 3 weeks, Adeline Fitch said, and Harlan Fitch is on that school board, and a judge will ask him what he knows about you. And I want you to understand who's going to be standing there. He's not a wicked man, Miss Winslow. He's a man who counted, and it come out even, and it didn't save his boy. And he has never in his life been able to say those 2 things in the same breath. The brand inspector came up on the Monday, and he came with 2 men, and it took Caleb Stone about 90 seconds to understand what it was. Morning? Stone. There ain't no stock inspection in July, Roy. There's a complaint. From who? Complaint don't say. Complaint's got to be signed. It's signed by the county, Roy said, and would not look at him. Says there's 40-odd head on this place carrying a Kansas road brand with no bill of sale filed at the county. Says they was drove in from Wyoming in '81. They was drove in from Wyoming in '81, and there's a bill of sale in my strongbox with a clerk's stamp on it. Then you show me the stamp and I'll go home. Caleb went and got it. Roy Bishop looked at it a long while, and turned it over and looked at the back. Ain't filed. It's stamped. Stamped ain't filed. Filing's a separate book. Roy handed it back. Stone. I'm going to say a thing, and then I'm going to get on my horse. The filing book for this district is kept by... I know who keeps it. Well, Roy said. Then you know. How many head do you hold? 41. On a filing. On a filing. For how long? Till it's cured. Caleb Stone stood in his own yard with the paper in his hand, and Clara, watching from the step, saw the exact moment that a man decides. She had never seen it before. She saw his shoulders come down an inch and his hands open. All right, he said. Caleb. Roy, you take your 41 head to the county pens, and you feed 'em, and you bill me for the feed, and I'll have the filing cured inside of 2 weeks. You ain't going to argue. No. I come up here with 2 men, Roy Bishop said. On account of I was told to expect. I know what you was told to expect, Caleb said. You go on back down and tell 'em I said thank you kindly and asked after their families. They went. Clara came off the step. That's $400 of horses. It's 600. Caleb. Ma'am, on the 14th of August, a judge is going to ask what kind of man I am, and Emmett Dowd would give a year of his life to be able to answer him. Caleb folded the paper and put it in his shirt. He'll not get it from me for $600. He'll not get it for the whole outfit. Clara stood in front of him. You've lost your horses over us. I've lost the use of 41 head for a few weeks. You've lost your means, and means is the very thing the court is going to... She stopped dead. Oh. Yeah, Caleb said. That's what it's for. That's what it's for. He's not trying to take your horses. He's trying to make sure that when the judge asks what you have, the answer's 20 head and a mortgage, Caleb said. Emmett Dowd can't do sums and hold a pen at the same time. He can do sums with a pen. That's a different animal, and I'd not underestimate it. Reverend Ames came up the ridge road on the Wednesday. He got down in the yard and stood there holding his hat, and did not come toward the house. Mr. Stone. Reverend? I've come to ask if you still want me. You'll have to say more than that. I told a woman with a child to go sleep in a depot, Ames said. That's the whole of my business here. I've not been able to write a sermon in 3 weeks. I sit down Saturday nights, and I put my pen on the paper, and I hear myself saying, it's out of the wind, and I get up again. Clara had come out. Reverend? Miss Winslow, I want you to know I voted. You told me, on the church steps, you told me you voted against, and then you sent me to a bench. Clara came down into the yard. May I tell you a thing plain, sir? I have thought about you more than I've thought about Mr. Fitch. Mr. Fitch tore my contract in front of 40 people, and I understood him. He's a man who counts. But you agreed with me, and then you sent me to a bench, and I have not been able to make sense of that at 2 o'clock in the morning for 24 nights. Ames stood there and took it. There isn't any sense in it, he said. That's what I've come up to tell you. There isn't any. I've hunted for it and there ain't any. I was afraid of my congregation, and I dressed it up as the depot's out of the wind, and a man who'll do that once will do it every Sunday of his life. Then why come now? Because Emmett Dowd sent his complaint to Helena, Ames said, and there's a line in it I can't get past. What line? Ames took a folded copy out of his coat. He's alleged, the Reverend said, that the child is being kept by an unmarried woman living in the house of an unmarried man, and that no minister of this county would consent to solemnize such a union, and that the arrangement is therefore what he calls a settled irregularity. Nobody spoke. He's used me, Ames said. He's put me in a court paper. He's told a judge in Helena that Red Valley's preacher won't marry you, and he did it without asking. Red Valley's preacher one single question, because he was certain. And was he right? Clara said. Reverend Ames looked up. 3 weeks ago, he said, he'd have been right. And now I've had 3 Saturdays with a blank page. He put his hat back on. Sunday week, Mr. Stone, on this ground or in my church, whichever you'll have, and if my congregation don't care for it, they may have my resignation on the same morning, and I'll be at peace either way. Amos Deal from the barn door said, Well, hell. Mr. Deal. Beg pardon, Reverend. That's all right, Ames said. I've thought worse. Nell spoke again on the Friday. She had not made a sound in 11 days, and Clara had stopped waiting for it, which is a thing you have to learn to do, or it will eat you alive. Caleb had the old bay mare on a rope in the corral, and the child on her bareback, and he was walking them in circles, and he was doing what he'd been doing every evening for a month, which was talking to her in a low, even voice, about nothing at all about the mare's feet, about the weather, about a horse he'd owned in Wyoming that would open a gate with its lip. And Nell said, "What was his name?" Caleb Stone stopped walking. He did not turn around fast. He did not shout for Clara. Afterward, Clara thought about that for a long time. "Whose name, honey?" "The gate horse." "Blue," Caleb said. "That's not a name." "It's what he was, though." Nell thought about this. "Pilot's a name," she said. "It is. Because he can't hear it." "That's so. But he knows it anyhow." The child's voice was small and rusty and absolutely matter-of-fact. "He knows it in his feet." And Caleb Stone stood in his own corral, holding a lead rope, and could not for about 15 seconds do anything at all. "Miss Nell?" "What?" "I'm going to ask you a thing and you don't have to answer." "All right. How long you been able to talk?" Nell was quiet. "A while," she said. "Why didn't you?" "Because everybody was sad," Nell said, "and when I talked, they got sadder." Clara had come around the barn. She had a bucket in her hand, and she set it down without knowing she'd done it, and it went over, and neither of them looked. "They said she sounds just like her mama," Nell said. "Every time. Every single time they said it, and then Aunt Clara would go out of the room." Clara made a sound. "And I did sound like her," the child said. "So I quit." Clara crossed that corral on legs that weren't hers, and went down on her knees in front of the mare and put her hands on her sister's daughter's boots. "Nell Winslow." "Am I in trouble?" "No, no baby, no." Clara was crying so hard she had to say it twice to be understood. "Listen to me. Listen. You sound like your mother. You do. And I want to hear it every day for the rest of my life. And if I go out of a room, it's not because I'm sorry you talked. It's because I loved her. And those are two different things. And I have done a terrible job of showing you which was which." Nell considered her aunt gravely. "You can go out of the room," she said. "I don't mind. I just want to know it's not because of me." "It was never because of you." "All right," Nell said. And then to Caleb, "Can we go around again?" They were married on the second Sunday of August on the ridge at 11 in the morning. 41 people came up that road. Amos counted them out loud as they came one at a time like a man reading a bill of sale. Odell Pratt in a black coat that had last been out of the trunk for a funeral. Mabel Deaver, who got down and said to Clara, "I'd like to say a thing." And Clara said, "Then say it." And Mrs. Deaver said, "I shut my door on a child." And Clara said, "You did." And Mrs. Deaver said, "That's all," and went and stood at the back. Roy Bishop, the brand inspector, with his hat in his hands. 9 of the 11 families with children of school age. Adeline Fitch came. Harlan Fitch did not. Reverend Ames stood up in front of them with no notes and said, "I've been 3 weeks trying to write something for this, and it wouldn't come, so I'll say the plain thing instead. On the 21st of July, I told a woman and a little girl that a depot bench was out of the wind. There isn't one of us here that did any better, and there's a good many did worse, and I'd ask every soul on this hill to carry that home and keep it, because we are none of us going to get another chance to be who we were on the 21st of July. Then he married them. Clara Winslow said her piece in a voice that carried to the back, and Caleb Stone said his in a voice that didn't, and had to say it twice, and there was some laughing, and it was the good kind. And when Ames asked who stood with the bride, a 6-year-old girl in a made-over dress said, "I do," out loud in front of 41 people, and about half of Red Valley found out at that exact moment that the child could speak at all. Odell Pratt cried harder than anybody. They came down off the ridge at 2 o'clock, married 9 days ahead of the hearing, with a license stamped by the deputy clerk of Lewis and Clark County, and a certificate signed by a minister, and 41 witnesses who could be named. And Boone Latimer was sitting his horse in the yard. He had his hat off. He'd had it off, Amos said later, since before they came in sight, which meant he'd been sitting out there in the sun holding it. "Marshall." "Mrs. Stone." Clara heard the name and did not have 1 second to feel it. Say it. Rider come through from Helena, Friday evening. Latimer got down. He held out a paper and did not let go of it right away. Dowd amended his complaint on the 29th. He put in that there was a marriage intended. He can't. He put in, Latimer said, that a marriage got up between a woman under threat of losing a child and a man that's been alone 11 mile up a mountain for 3 years. Ain't a marriage. It's an arrangement made for the court. And he asked the judge to look at it that way. And the Judge Whitcomb moved the hearing. Clara's hand closed on Caleb's arm. To when? Wednesday. Wednesday's 3 days. And there's a second page, Latimer said. Caleb took the paper. He read it. Clara watched his face and knew. Read it out, she said. Ma'am, read it out. Pending the hearing, Caleb Stone said. The court orders the minor child placed with a household of established standing in the county. He looked up. Effective on service. On service, Clara repeated. That's now, Latimer said. That's me handing it to you. That's what service is. Nobody moved for 3 full seconds. Then Clara turned around and put herself in front of the child, and Amos Deal came off the porch, and Latimer said, Don't, in a voice with nothing in it at all. Amos. Caleb, I ain't. Amos, stand still. The old man stood still, shaking. Marshal, Caleb said. Which household? Boone Latimer looked at him for a long moment. Fitch, he said, and Nell Winslow, who had spoken 11 words in 15 months and 30, since Friday took hold of 2 of the cowboy's fingers and said clear as a bell so that every person still standing in that yard heard it. Don't let them take me. Caleb Stone put his hand over the child's hand and held it there, and he did not answer her. Mr. Stone. Latimer's voice was careful. I got to have the girl. I know what you got to have. Then, give me a minute, Boone. Caleb. I said give me a minute. He still hadn't raised his voice all summer, and he didn't then. You come up my road on my wedding day with a paper in your hand. You can stand in my yard 60 seconds while I figure out how to say a thing to a 6-year-old. Latimer put his hat back on and looked at the ground. Behind them, Amos Deal had gotten as far as the porch post and no farther. His hands were opening and closing. Amos. 4 years I've been on this place. Amos. 4 years, and I never once asked you for a thing. The old man's voice was wrecked. I'm asking now. Let me go in the house. What's in the house? You know what's in the house. That's why you ain't going in it, Caleb said. They took your boy off you, and you stood down that road with your hands empty, and you been sorry 3 years. Amos. Caleb turned around. You say one more word about my boy in front of that child, and you and me are done, and I'd rather cut my arm off. Amos Deal sat down on the step like his strings had been cut. Clara had not moved. She was standing between the marshal and the girl, with her arms out behind her, the way a woman stands in front of a stove when a child gets close to it, and she had not once looked at the paper. Caleb. Ma'am. Tell me it's legal. It's legal. Tell me plain. Not what you think I can stand. Plain. It's a district court order signed by a territorial judge, Caleb said. And if we put our hands on it, then Wednesday morning, a lawyer stands up and says, we defied the court, and after that, it don't matter one particle what kind of people we are. That's the trap, Clara. That's the whole trap. It ain't built to take her. It's built to make us take her back. Clara closed her eyes. 3 days. 3 days. She sleeps in a strange house for 3 days with the man who tore up my contract. Yes. And if I hand her over, I'm the woman who handed her over. And if I don't, I'm the woman who ran. Clara laughed, and there was nothing in it. He's a bookkeeper, isn't he? He's built me a column with 2 lines, and both of them add up his way. He has. Then we'll take the one that leaves us standing Wednesday, Clara said, and turned around and got down on her knees in front of the child. Nell had not let go of Caleb's fingers. Nell. No. Baby. I said it out loud. The girl's chin was going, and her voice was climbing, and it was the most any of them had heard out of her at one time. I said it out loud. I said, "Don't let them take me." I said it, and you're going to anyway. Listen to me. I talked, and it didn't work. Nell. Clara took her by both shoulders. It worked. It worked better than anything's ever worked. Don't you ever think a thing you say out loud is wasted? Don't you ever? Because on Wednesday morning, I am going to stand in front of a judge, and every single thing I've got is a thing somebody said out loud. Nell stared at her. Now I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, and I'm not going to lie to you one time because your mother lied to me when I was little, and I've never forgiven her for it. You're going to go down that road with Marshal Latimer and stay 3 nights with Mrs. Fitch. Is that the man from the train? That's his wife. He tore up your paper. He did. I saw him do it. I know you did, Clara said. I don't want to. I know. Aunt Clara, I don't want to. And Clara Winslow, who had not lied to that child in 15 months, felt the whole thing rise up in her, the $4.60, the bench, the laughing, the closed doors, and she put it down and said the only true thing she had left. I'm going to come get you Wednesday. Do you promise? No, Clara said. Nell went very still. I won't promise because I don't know, and if I promised and it went wrong, you'd never believe a word out of me again as long as you lived. Clara's hands were shaking on the child's shoulders. Here's what I'll swear to instead. I will be in that room Wednesday morning. I will be in that room and I will say every single thing I know, and when I've said it all, I'll say it again louder, and whatever that judge decides, he is going to decide it having heard me. That much I can swear. Nell thought about it for a long moment. That's better than a promise, she said. Is it? A promise is just a word. And Clara Winslow put her face against her sister's daughter's neck and held on for about 4 seconds, because 4 seconds was all she could spend and still get back up. Caleb crouched down. Miss Nell? You said you'd call me that always. I did, and I will. Now I'm going to ask you to do a hard thing, and it ain't the one you're thinking of. What? Talk. Nell blinked at him. You go in that house and you talk, Caleb said. To Mrs. Fitch, to Mr. Fitch, to anybody that comes to the door. You tell him about Pilot and how he hears through the floor. You tell him about the bay mare and the gate horse. You tell him what you eat and how you sleep and every fool thing that comes in your head. Why? Because there's people down there, Caleb said, been telling each other a story about a poor little dumb thing that don't speak, and it's easy to move a story around. It's a considerable sight, harder to move a girl who tells you about her dog. Nell looked at him a long time. All right, she said. That's my girl. I'm not scared. I know it. I am though, she said, and let go of his fingers and walked past all of them to the marshal's horse by herself, and Boone Latimer took his hat clean off and had to stand there a second before he could lift her up. Adeline Fitch's buggy was at the Ford waiting because Latimer had had that much decency in him to arrange. Harlan Fitch was sitting in it. He did not get down. He sat there with the lines in his hands and looked straight ahead down the road while his wife got out and came around and put her arms up for the child, and he did not turn his head 1 inch, and Clara, who had ridden down behind them the whole 11 miles, because she was not going to let that girl out of her sight 1 second before she had to saw it, and understood it, and hated him for it, more than she had hated him on the platform. Mrs. Fitch. Miss Winslow. Adeline caught herself. Mrs. Stone. She talks now. I heard it, Sunday, on the hill. Adeline's mouth was trembling. I heard her say I do, and I thought my heart would come out of me. Then let her talk. Whatever she says, whenever she says it. Yes. And Mrs. Fitch? Clara took hold of the buggy rail. She won't cry. She'll go 3 days and never cry once, and everybody will say what a good little thing she is, and then she'll be 6 years old, sitting in a strange room, not crying. If you leave a lamp lit, she'll sleep. She won't ask you for it. Adeline Fitch put her hand over Clara's on the rail. I raised a boy, she said. I know about lamps. And then from the buggy seat without turning around, Harlan Fitch said, I did not ask for this. Clara looked up at him. I beg your pardon. Dowd put my name in that order. Fitch's voice was flat and awful. He wrote a household of established standing, and he handed the judge a list with one name on it, and the first I heard of it was Friday night, when Latimer come to my door and told me I was to keep a child. And you said yes. I said the court had spoke. You could have said no, could I? Harlan Fitch turned his head at last, and looked down at her, and his face was gray. And where'd she have gone then? Mrs. Stone Devers, the hotel. You've seen how that goes. There's 400 people in this valley, and I could name you 2 houses that'd take her, and one of 'em is mine, and the other one is the preacher's, and Ames can't keep her, because Dowd's already put his name in the complaint. Clara had no answer for that. I'll not have it said I wanted it, Fitch said. That's all. That's the whole of what I come down to the Ford to say, and I've said it. Then say one more thing. Ma'am? Wednesday, Clara said. You'll be called. You're the chairman of the board that dismissed me, and you're the man keeping her, and Emmett Dowd will put you on that stand, because he's certain of you, the same way he was certain of the Reverend. What will you say? Harlan Fitch looked at her for a long moment. I'll say what's true, he said. Which part? And Harlan Fitch turned his face front again, and shook the lines, and did not answer her at all. Caleb found her at the corral at midnight, still dressed still in the collar she'd been married in. Ma'am. Don't. You've been out here 4 hours. If I go in that house, I'll go past her door, Clara said. I've thought it through. I've thought through every road, and this is the one I can walk. He came and put his forearms on the rail beside her, 2 feet of rail between them, same as always. I want to say a thing, and it ain't going to come out right. Then say it wrong. We've been married 9 hours, Caleb said, and I've not once looked at you. Clara let out a breath. I know it. I want you to understand that ain't... He stopped. Started again. I don't want you thinking that. Not for a minute. Not ever. Caleb. She turned around. Do you know what I was doing out here for 4 hours? No. I was making a list of everything I have. That's a habit. I've had it since Kansas. When a thing goes bad, I stand somewhere and count what's left. Her voice cracked. And I got to the end of it, and there was you, and I have been standing here since sundown being so grateful for you that I frightened myself, and I don't know how to say that to a man I married this morning for a reason. You didn't marry me for a reason. I married you 9 days before a hearing. You asked me 19 days before it, Caleb said, standing in the yard with nobody pushing at you, and you told me you wasn't frightened, and you wanted it on the record. And I've had that on the record all summer, Clara, and there ain't a judge in this territory can take it off. Clara put her hands over her face. She said, don't let them take me. I heard her. She said it out loud, and I put her on a horse. You did. Say it was right. I can't. Caleb, I can't say it was right, he said. I can say it was the only one that leaves us standing Wednesday, and that's a different animal, and I'll not dress it up for you. Ma'am, I stood at a rope across a ford 3 years ago and done the arithmetic and turned around, and I have never once known whether I was decent or afraid, and I'll tell you now that this afternoon felt exactly the same in my chest. Clara looked at him. Then we'll neither of us know, she said. We'll neither of us know, and we'll go anyway. Odell Pratt came up the Ridge Road at 5 o'clock Monday morning riding a mule. He had never in his life been on a horse he trusted, and he had not been up that road since the funerals, and he got down in the yard, stiff as a plank, and stood there holding a flat tin box against his chest with both arms. Odell. Caleb. It's 5 in the morning. I know what time it is. Pratt's jaw was working. I've been up since Friday. Clara came out. Mr. Pratt? Ma'am. He looked at her, and then at the box, and then at the ground. I got to say something first, and then I'll open it. And if you throw me off this place after, I'll not hold it against you. Sir. I keep the telegraph. I know you do. I keep the telegraph, Odell Pratt said. And the rule of it is that a message is between the sender and the receiver, and a key man don't speak of it. Not to his wife. Not to the marshal. Not ever. And I have kept that rule for 19 years, and I have kept things I'd give money to be rid of. He was breathing hard. And I have been sitting in that depot for 3 weeks with this box knowing what's in it. And Friday night that girl went by my window on a marshal's horse. Clara took hold of the porch post. Mr. Pratt. I let you sleep on a bench, he said. I brung you a blanket and a cup of water, and I let you sleep on a bench, and I have told myself all summer that the blanket counted for something, and Friday night I found out what the blanket was. It was a way for a man to be kind without being any trouble to himself. He set the box down on the step and opened it. Every message goes in a book, he said. Sender receiver date, and the text of it, and the operator keeps the file copy. That's the law, not my notion. Now I ain't going to read 'em out to you. You want 'em, you'll take 'em to that judge, and I'll stand up and swear to the file, and Wednesday afternoon I'll likely be out of a job, and I've made my peace with it. Mr. Pratt. 23rd of July, Odell said. Emmett Dowd to the Territorial Bindery at Helena, instructing them to expect the license book of the Red Valley District for rebinding. Clara sat down on the step. The 23rd, she said. 2 days after Ms. Fitch drove her buggy up this road. And the book didn't go on the 23rd, ma'am. It went on the 2nd of August, because I loaded the crate myself, and there's a freight receipt in this box with my own hand on it. He turned a page. And on the 11th mind, he wired 'em again to ask, would they date the receiving stamp back? Caleb Stone said very quietly, and did they be bindery wired back that they would not? Nobody said anything. There's more, Pratt said. 28th of July, Dowd to the office of the Territorial Brand Board, 29th Brand Board to Roy Bishop, instructing a complaint inspection at the Stone Place. 31st Dowd to a lawyer in Helena, name of Purviance, and that one I will read out because it's 4 words, and I've not been able to get it out of my head since. Read it. Is a marriage sufficient? Odell Pratt said. Clara stood up off the step. The 31st. Yes'm. We announced the 2nd Sunday. That was the 29th we told Reverend Ames. She was walking now. He knew inside 2 days. Somebody told him inside 2 days, Caleb said. Who? Ma'am, 41 people came up that hill, Caleb said. You can't blame a town for talking. That ain't the crime. The crime's in the box. Amos Deal from the doorway. I'll say the thing nobody's saying. Say it. He asked a lawyer, is a marriage sufficient, on the 31st, and he got his answer, and then he went and got the hearing moved up, and the girl took. Amos spat off the porch. Which means the lawyer told him yes. Which means he knows the marriage holds. Then why? Because he ain't fighting the marriage, Caleb said. He never was. He's fighting you, ma'am. He's trying to make you do a thing before Wednesday. Run or lay hands on the marshal or stand up in that room and come apart. He don't need to beat you. He needs you to look like a woman that can't be trusted with a child for 3 days. The yard was quiet. Mr. Pratt, Clara said. Ma'am. On the 21st of July, you brought me a blanket and a cup of water. I said what that was worth. You said what you thought it was worth, Clara said. I'll tell you what it was worth. I sat on that bench with $4.60, and I had been laughed at by 40 people, and turned off 3 doorsteps, and a man I'd never met set down a cup of water and said, don't tell nobody. And I have thought about that cup of water every single day since, sir, and it is not nothing. It was the only kindness in Red Valley, Montana, on the worst day of my life, and you will not stand in my yard at 5 in the morning and call it convenient. Odell Pratt took his hat off and put his sleeve across his eyes and did not manage to say anything at all. Now pick up your box, Clara said, and come inside and eat something because you look like death, and we've got 2 days. Nell Winslow found Harlan Fitch's other room on the Monday afternoon. The house had 6 of them, and she had been through 5 because Mrs. Fitch had said, go where you like, honey, and Nell took people at their word. The 6th one was at the end of the hall, and the door was shut, and she opened it because she was 6. There was a bed made up in it. There was a shelf with a wooden horse on it, and a tin whistle and a slate. She was still standing there when Harlan Fitch came up the stairs. Get out of there. Nell turned around. I'm sorry. Get out of that room. Mrs. Fitch said, I know what she said. He had hold of the door with one hand. That door stays shut. It stayed shut 3 years. Nell looked at him. "Whose is it?" she said. "That ain't your business." "All right." She came out and stood in the hall. "The slate's got writing on it." Harlan Fitch's face did something. "What?" "The slate, on the shelf. It's got writing on it, and it's gone all faded, but you can still see it." Nell scuffed her shoe. "It says Peter Fitch, and then it says 8, and then it says August." The man stood in that hallway and did not speak for a long time. "He was learning to date his work," he said at last. "The school teacher we had then made him date every sum." "Is he your boy?" "He was." "Where is he?" "He died," Harlan Fitch said. "My mother died," said Nell. Fitch looked down at her. "I know it. Everybody says I sound like her." The child said it the way she said everything now, plain laying it out. "That's why I quit talking. But Mr. Stone says people can stand more than you think, and Aunt Clara says she wants to hear it, so I do it now." "Mr. Stone says that?" "He says a lot of things." "Does he?" Fitch's voice had gone strange. "What else does he say?" And Nell Winslow, who had been told by a mountain cowboy to talk to anybody who came to the door, said, "He says you counted right." Harlan Fitch let go of the doorframe. "He says what?" "He says you had 40 children in the town and 2 on the ridge, and you counted right, and that's the hell of it." Nell frowned. "He says a bad word when he says it. Am I in trouble for saying it back?" "No." "He says he's had 3 years and he can't make you wrong," she thought. "He can't make you right either." He said both. Adeline Fitch, who had come up the stairs behind her husband and stopped 4 steps down, said afterward that she had been married to that man for 29 years and had seen him bury a son and had never once seen his face do what it did in that hallway. "Child," Harlan Fitch said. "Yes, sir." "Go on downstairs to Mrs. Fitch." "Am I in trouble?" "No," he said. "No, you ain't in any trouble at all." She went. He stood there. Then he went into the room at the end of the hall for the first time in 3 years and shut the door behind him, and his wife sat on the stairs outside it until dark. Judge Amos Whitcomb, no relation. He said to anybody's hired man, sat at the Red Valley District on Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock in the schoolhouse because it was the only building in town with benches, and the schoolhouse had been standing empty all summer for want of a teacher. Clara Winslow Stone walked in the door of the building she had crossed 1,000 miles to work in and had to stop for a second, and Caleb put his hand flat between her shoulder blades and held it there until she went on. It was full. Every bench. People standing at the back 3 deep and more in the yard at the windows. Nell was in the front on the left with Adeline Fitch, and she stood up when Clara came in, and Clara shook her head no, and the child sat back down and did not cry. Emmett Dowd had a lawyer. Purviance was a soft-handed man from Helena, in a good coat, who had plainly been paid in advance. Caleb Stone had Reverend Ames, who had read law for 2 years in Ohio before he took orders, and had said so on Monday night in the Stone kitchen, with his hands shaking, and had said also, "I'll be no good at it. But I'll be there, and I'll be there in front of my whole congregation, and after this morning, they'll all know exactly where I stand, and I'll never have to be afraid of them again." Judge Whitcomb was 61 years old, dry as a stick, and had been riding that circuit 11 years. "Sit down, all of you. Mr. Purviance, this is a petition on a minor. It is not a trial, there is no jury, and I will not have speeches. I've read the papers. I've read them twice, which is once more than I generally manage." He set his spectacles down. "Mr. Dowd, stand up." Dowd stood. "You are the petitioner." "Yes, Your Honor." "You are also the deputy clerk of this district." "Yes, Your Honor." "And the county treasurer." "Yes." "And a member of the school board that dismissed this woman." Purviance was on his feet. "Your Honor, Mr. Dowd's public offices are a matter of the county's convenience and have no—" "Mr. Purviance, I have been on this bench 11 years, and in every small town in this territory, there is one man who holds 4 offices, and it is generally because he is the only one who will do the work." Whitcomb looked over his spectacles. "It is also from time to time because it is convenient to him. I'm going to find out which this is," Sit down. Purviance sat down. It went 2 hours. Purviance put in the St. Louis letter and the dismissal for moral cause, and Clara heard it read out loud for the second time in her life, and kept her chin up and her hands still. He put in that she had no means, and Ames stood up and said she had a husband with a deeded ranch, and Purviance said the husband's stock was under a brand hold, and Whitcomb said, "Under a what?" "A hold, Your Honor. 41 head. A filing irregularity." "Filed by whom?" "The Territorial Brand Board, Your Honor." "On whose complaint?" Purviance looked at his papers. "The complaint is unsigned, Your Honor." "An unsigned complaint," Whitcomb said, "that removes the means of the very man whose means are at issue in a petition filed by the man who keeps the filing book. Mr. Purviance, I want you to hear that back the way I just heard it." "Your Honor." "Sit down." Odell Pratt was on the stand 11 minutes. He set the tin box on the rail, and he swore to every page in it, and when Purviance came at him about the confidentiality of the wire, he said, "Sir, I've broke it once in 19 years, and I'll be answering for it the rest of my life, and if you want to have me put off my job, then have me put off it, but that receipt has got my hand on it, and the crate went on the 2nd of August. Emmett Dowd sat through the whole of it looking at the floor. "Mr. Dowd," Whitcomb said, "did you wire the bindery on the 11th of August to ask them to date a receiving stamp backward?" Purviance stood. "Your Honor, my client." "I asked him, not you." "Your Honor, I must advise." "Advise him sitting down." Whitcomb waited. "Mr. Dowd." Emmett Dowd stood up. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. The room made a sound. Then Purviance called Harlan Fitch. He called him last, and he called him confidently, and Clara watched him do it, and understood that the lawyer from Helena had been told by a man who had been certain about Reverend Ames, and certain about Adeline Fitch, and certain about everything all summer exactly what Harlan Fitch would say. "Mr. Fitch, you are chairman of the school board of this district." "I am." "You conducted the vote on the 20th of July that dismissed Mrs. Stone from her contract." "I did." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds of the letter from St. Louis." "And in your judgment as chairman, a man responsible for 31 children of this valley, is Mrs. Stone a fit person to have the raising of a child?" Harlan Fitch sat there in his good gray coat. "No," he said. Clara's hands went cold. "Thank you. No further?" "I ain't finished." Purviance stopped. "Mr. Fitch," Whitcomb said, "the court will hear the rest of your answer." I said no. Harlan Fitch said, "Because that is what I have said all summer, and I have said it to my wife and to the marshal and to God, and I would like this court to know what it is worth." "Your Honor." "Mr. Purviance, if you interrupt this witness again, I will have you outside." Whitcomb turned. "Go on." "On the 21st of July, I tore a woman's contract up in front of 40 people on a depot platform," Fitch said. "I did not have to do it there. I could have done it in a room. There is no man in this valley believes that was necessary, and there is no man in this valley said so to me until a mountain rancher stood on them steps and said it, and I've thought about it every night since." "Mr. Fitch," Whitcomb said, "you are answering a question about the woman. You are talking about yourself." "I know it, Your Honor. I'm getting there." "Then get there." Harlan Fitch put his hands on his knees. 3 years ago I voted the Ridge Road closed for the diphtheria," he said. "Quarantine. Nobody up, nobody down. Doctor stays where the numbers is. 9 children died in 11 days, and 2 of them was Caleb Stone's wife and boy, on the wrong side of my rope, and 1 of them was mine on the right side of it, and I have stood up in this valley for 3 years as the man who done the hard arithmetic." The room was dead quiet. "Your Honor, I closed that road on the 11th of August. Everybody in this valley says the 12th. Stone says the 12th. He said it to Mrs. Stone in July on that platform, and it come back to me, and I have never corrected one living soul, because the Kelso boy took sick on the morning of the 12th. If I closed it on the 12th, then I closed it after the fever was in the town. If I closed it on the 11th, I closed it a day early on nothing but my own say-so, and there was a doctor and a road, and one day, and I have been carrying that one day for 3 years." Adeline Fitch put both hands over her mouth. "I ain't telling this court that makes me a murderer," Fitch said. "It don't. My boy died on the 19th in a town with a doctor in it, and the doctor couldn't do nothing. I know that. I have been told that by 3 men and my wife." "Then why are you telling it?" Whitcomb said. "Because Mr. Purviance has asked me whether that woman is fit," Harlan Fitch said, "and I want this court to understand the man he's asking." He turned his head and looked at Clara. "I am a man who counts," he said. "I've counted my whole life, and I have been right more than I've been wrong, and I've built a town on it. And on the 21st of July, I looked at a schoolteacher with $4 and a child, and I counted her, and I come up short, and I did not ask her one question. Not one. She stood on my platform and told me she'd not say another word about that little girl, and I called it hiding. It took Caleb Stone about 90 seconds to work out it was the opposite." "Mr. Fitch," Purviance said, "so know your honor in my judgment as chairman she ain't fit." Harlan Fitch's voice broke in the middle of it, and he went on anyway. "And my judgment as chairman is worth exactly what it was worth on the 11th of August, 1879, and I would not hang a dog on it, and I'd ask this court to weigh it accordingly." Nobody in that schoolhouse moved. Judge Whitcomb took his spectacles off. "Mr. Purviance." "Your Honor, I the witness has plainly—" "Have you anything further?" "No, Your Honor." "Reverend Ames." "Nothing, Your Honor," Ames said and sat down hard. Whitcomb sat back. "I've been on this circuit 11 years, he said. "I have heard 400 petitions on minor children, and I can tell you what nearly every one of them comes down to, which is that the adults in the room all know precisely what ought to happen, and none of them can say it out loud without losing something." He looked at the tin box. He looked at the brand hold. He looked at Emmett Dowd, who had not raised his head in an hour. This morning has been unusual in that regard. He'd put his spectacles back on. "Mrs. Stone, stand up." Clara stood. "You were asked on a public platform on the 21st of July to explain your dismissal, and you refused, and it cost you your contract, your position, and a night on a bench. Why?" "Because she has to grow up here, Your Honor." "That is what your husband said before he knew you. It's in Mr. Pratt's testimony." Whitcomb leaned forward. "I want your answer, not his." Clara stood in the schoolhouse she had crossed 1,000 miles to work in. "Because a town forgets a woman in about 5 years," she said, "and it never forgets a child." Whitcomb held her eye for a long moment. "Sit down." He gathered his papers together and squared them. "I'm not going to rule on this record," he said. Clara's hand closed on Caleb's wrist. "Your Honor." "Sit down, Reverend. I've heard a great deal this morning about a 6-year-old girl. I've heard from a station master, a brand inspector, a school board chairman, 2 lawyers, one of whom is a preacher and a county officer, who has just admitted to falsifying a public date. I have not heard one word from the only person in this room whose life is being disposed of." He looked at the front bench on the left. "The court will hear from the child, alone. In the back room, no counsel, no kin, and I'll have the marshal on the door." Clara came up out of her seat. "Your Honor, she's only just started to—" "Mrs. Stone." "Your Honor, please." And Nell Winslow stood up on the front bench on the left, in front of 140 people, and said in a voice that reached the back of the room, "I'll go." Marshal Boone Latimer put his back against the door of that back room and stood there with his hat in his hand, and for 18 minutes the schoolhouse in Red Valley, Montana, held 140 people who did not say one word. Clara sat in the second row with her hands flat on her knees. "Ma'am, don't talk to me." "All right. I'm sorry." Her voice came out of her sideways. "Caleb, I'm sorry I can't. If I talk, I'll get up, and if I get up, I'll go through that door, and if I go through that door, I'll have done in 1 minute what Emmett Dowd's been trying to make me do all summer." "I know it. So don't talk to me." "All right," Caleb said, and put his hand down flat on the bench between them, palm up, and left it there. She took it at minute 9. Amos Deal, 3 rows back, was praying. He had not prayed in 11 years, and he was making a poor job of it, and Odell Pratt next to him heard the whole thing and never mentioned it to a living soul. At minute 14, Mabel Deaver said out loud to nobody, "That child slept on a bench because of me." And her neighbor said, "Hush, Mabel." And Mrs. Deaver said, "I'll not hush. I've hushed since July." At minute 16, Reverend Ames leaned over the rail and said, "Mrs. Stone, whatever comes out of that room." "Reverend, if you're going to tell me God has a plan." "I was going to say I've got a horse and $40, Ames said, "and Idaho is 4 days' ride and I'd not sleep worse for it." Clara turned and looked at him. "You'd lose your church." "Mrs. Stone," Ames said, "I lost my church on the 21st of July. I've just been showing up to the building." Behind the door, Judge Amos Whitcomb had pulled 2 chairs around so they faced each other, and he had sat down in one of them, and he had taken his spectacles off and put them in his pocket, which was a thing he had learned to do a long time back. "Sit down, child." Nell sat. "Do you know who I am?" "You're the judge." "That's right. Do you know what a judge does?" "You decide." "That's about the size of it." Whitcomb folded his hands. "Now I'm going to tell you 2 things before we start, and they're both true, and I don't tell them to every child." "All right. The first is that you are not in any trouble whatsoever. Not one particle. Nothing you say in this room can put you in trouble." "That's what Mr. Fitch said." "Did he?" "He said it in the hallway when I found the room with the slate in it." Whitcomb was quiet a second. "The second thing," he said, "is that I have been doing this 11 years, and in 11 years I have had grown people sit in that chair and tell me what they think I want to hear. Every one of them thought they were helping. Every one of them made it worse. So I'll ask you not to help me." "Then what do I do?" "You tell me the true thing, even if it's ugly." Nell thought about that. "What if the true thing is bad about somebody I like?" "Then it's still the true thing," Whitcomb said. "That's the whole trick of it, and most people never learn it, and you're 6. "I'm 6 3/4. "I beg your pardon." "October," Nell said. "Noted." He leaned back. "How long have you been at the Fitch house?" 3 nights. "Were you treated well?" "Yes." "Say more than yes." Mrs. Fitch left a lamp lit. Nell's hands were in her lap. "I didn't ask her for it. She just did it. And the second night she came and sat on the end of the bed and she didn't say anything. She just sat there and I said, 'Is something wrong?' And she said, 'No, honey. I just wanted to sit in a room where a child was sleeping.'" Whitcomb's face did not change. "And Mr. Fitch? He's sad." "That's not what I asked." "You said tell the true thing." "So I did." Whitcomb inclined his head. "Go on then." "He's sad all the time and he does his voice loud so nobody knows." Nell frowned, working at it. "He hollered at me for opening a door, and then he sat down on the stairs after." Mrs. Fitch sat outside that room until dark. I could see her from the landing. "Did he frighten you?" "No." "You're certain?" "He's not the frightening kind." Nell said it flatly. "The frightening kind is quiet." Judge Whitcomb sat with that one for a moment. "Child, do you know why you're in this room?" "Because Mr. Dowd wants me put in a home in Helena." "Who told you that?" "Aunt Clara." "When?" "Saturday, before the marshal came." Nell looked up. "She tells me things. She said she wouldn't lie to me because her mother because my mother lied to her when she was little and she never forgave it." "She told you a 6-year-old that?" "She tells me everything." Nell's chin came up half an inch. "She said she wouldn't promise to come get me because she didn't know for sure. She said she'd swear she'd be in the room instead." "And what did you make of that?" "I said it was better than a promise." "Why?" "Because a promise is just a word," Nell said, "and she was going to do a hard thing whether it worked or not." Whitcomb reached up and rubbed the bridge of his nose where the spectacles usually sat. "Tell me about the man." "Mr. Stone." "Yes." "He gave me a horse." "He gave a 6-year-old a horse." "He didn't put me on it," Nell said. "He put the rope in my hand and walked away. Aunt Clara hollered. He said everybody does things for me since my mother died, and I know the difference between being took care of and being trusted." "Did you?" "Yes." "How long did you hold it?" "Till Mr. Deal asked me for it. It was a long time. My arms went funny." "Why didn't you put it down?" Nell looked at the judge like he'd asked why water was wet. "Because he trusted me," she said. Whitcomb sat back in the chair. Has that man ever raised his hand to you? No. His voice? No. Has anybody in that house? Mr. Deal yells, but it's at the stove. At the stove. He argues with it, Nell said. Aunt Clara moved his coffee tin one time and he said a word. I imagine he did. Whitcomb's mouth twitched exactly once and went flat again. Now I'm going to ask you the hard one, and you may take as long as you like, and if you'd rather not answer, I'll not hold it against you or anybody else. All right. Why did you stop talking? Nell's hands went still in her lap. Everybody says I sound like her. Your mother. Every time. They'd say it every single time, and then Aunt Clara would go out of the room. Nell's voice had gotten smaller, but it did not stop. So I quit. And then it got to be a long time, and I didn't know how to start again because if I started, everybody would make a fuss, and I didn't want a fuss. I wanted it to just be regular. 15 months is a long while to wait for regular. I know it. What made you start? Aunt Clara asked him to marry her in the yard, Nell said, and he was taking too long. Judge Amos Whitcomb, 61 years old, 11 years on that circuit, put his hand over his mouth. Are you laughing? I am not, he said, laughing. You look like it. Child, I've been called a great many things, and never that. He took his hand down. 2 more, and then we're done. All right. Where do you want to live? With them. That was quick. You said don't help you, Nell said. You didn't say be slow. Fair enough. Whitcomb leaned forward and his voice changed, and it was the voice he had used 400 times in 11 years and never gotten used to. Last one. Suppose I say you can't. Suppose I've got a reason you wouldn't understand, and I say you go somewhere else. What then? Nell was quiet for a long moment. Then I'd go, she said. You would? She'd want me to go. She wouldn't want me to fight the judge and get her in trouble. The child's jaw was working now. But I'd talk the whole time. You'd talk. He told me to. Her voice cracked all the way across. He said there's people telling each other a story about a poor little dumb thing that don't speak, and it's easy to move a story around, and it's a lot harder to move a girl who tells you about her dog. So I'd talk. Every day. To everybody. Till somebody got tired of it and brought me home. Judge Whitcomb stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room for 11 seconds. Marshall, he said. Latimer opened the door. Take this child back to her seat. And Boone, Your Honor, put her next to the woman. The whole schoolhouse heard that. Clara made a sound she was ashamed of for years afterward, and Nell came down that aisle and climbed into the second row and put herself under Clara's arm, like a coat going on a hook, and Judge Amos Whitcomb walked back to the front of the room and did not sit down. Mr. Purviance. Your Honor. How much has your client paid you? Purviance blinked. Your Honor, I don't see how. How much? $140, Your Honor, plus expenses. Mr. Dowd, stand up. Emmett Dowd stood up. He had not lifted his head in an hour and a half, and he lifted it now, and his face was the color of a used dish rag. You are the county treasurer of this district. Yes, Your Honor. What is the annual salary? $220. So you have spent 2/3 of a year's salary, Whitcomb said, petitioning for the custody of a child you have never once spoken to. The room went absolutely silent. Your Honor. Have you spoken to her? No, Your Honor. Have you ever been in a room with her? No. Do you know her name? Emmett Dowd opened his mouth. Her given name, Mr. Dowd, the one her mother gave her. It is on the first page of the petition you filed, and I would like to know whether you have read your own paper. Dowd stood there. 12 seconds. 14. Somebody at the back of the room said, God Almighty, and was hushed. Sit down, Whitcomb said. Your Honor, it's... Sit down. Emmett Dowd sat down, and Clara Winslow Stone found to her own considerable disgust that she was sorry for him. I'll give my ruling, Whitcomb said. Reverend, I'd ask you to write it out fair afterward for the county book, since it appears the county's clerk is otherwise occupied. Yes, Your Honor. The petition is denied. The schoolhouse came up off its benches. Whitcomb let it run about 4 seconds and then said, "Sit," and it sat. I want to say why, because rulings that don't say why breed lawyers. He put his spectacles back on. The petitioner has asked this court to find that the minor child is in the care of a woman with no means, no legal claim, and no character. I find as follows. On means, the child's guardian is married to a man with a deeded ranch of 1,100 acres and 61 head, and the only cloud on that estate is an unsigned brand complaint filed through the office of the petitioner himself. That hold is vacated as of this morning, and Mr. Bishop will restore the stock at the county's expense, not Mr. Stone's. Caleb Stone let his breath out. On legal claim, the marriage of the 8th of August is valid. It was solemnized by an ordained minister under a license issued by the deputy clerk of this district, who is the petitioner, and who issued it on the 28th of July with his own hand after telling the groom on the 24th that the book was in Helena. It was not in Helena. It went out on the 2nd of August by freight, and the receipt is in Mr. Pratt's box, and the petitioner attempted on the 11th to have the receiving date falsified and the bindery to its credit, and I will write them a letter saying so, refused. Purviance had his head in his hands. Which brings me to character, Whitcomb said, and I'll be plain, because there are people standing in the yard at them windows, and I'd rather they heard it from me than from each other over a fence. Nobody moved. I have looked all morning for a woman of no character. What I have found is a woman who was asked in public on the 21st of July to buy her position back with a dead girl's name, and who declined. I have found that she declined at the cost of her contract, her wages, her lodging, and a night on a bench with a child on her lap. I have found that she has never once told this town the thing that would have cleared her, and that she has not told it today in my court, with everything she has in the world sitting on it. Clara's hand went over her mouth. Mrs. Stone, she stood. You may sit. I'd rather stand, Your Honor. I expect you would. Whitcomb looked at her a long moment. You are one of the 2 or 3 people I have met on this bench I would call formidable, and I want you to understand that when I say the town of Red Valley did not deserve you in July, I am not being kind. I am making a finding of fact. Clara sat down because her legs quit. Now, on the disposition of the minor. Whitcomb turned a page. Custody and care of the child, known as Nell Winslow, are placed with Caleb and Clara Stone jointly effective immediately, and I will have the papers of adoption drawn, and I will sign them myself when I ride this circuit in October, so that no man in this county ever again has to ask who she is. Nell said out loud, Does that mean I stay? That means you stay. Forever. Child, said Judge Amos Whitcomb, I have signed 1,100 orders in my life, and that is the first one anybody has asked me to make, forever, and yes, forever. And the schoolhouse in Red Valley, Montana, came apart. It took Whitcomb 4 minutes to get it back, and he never did get it all the way. There is more, and it is less pleasant, he said. Mr. Dowd, stand up. Last time. Dowd stood. You have admitted from that chair to attempting to procure a false date on a public record. You concealed a license book from an applicant. You caused a brand hold to be laid on a private citizen's stock through an unsigned complaint routed through your own filing office. Any one of those is a matter for the territorial attorney. Somebody at the back said, Hang him, and Whitcomb said without turning his head, Whoever said that will leave my courtroom or I will find out who he is. Nobody left. Nobody said anything else either. I am not going to send you to Helena in irons, Mr. Dowd, and I'll tell you why, and you will not enjoy the reason. Whitcomb took his spectacles off again. You are removed from the office of Deputy Clerk of this district as of this hour. You are suspended as County Treasurer, pending an audit of the last 4 years, which Mr. Pratt and Reverend Ames will conduct, and which I will read personally. If it comes back clean, you may keep your place, and I expect it will come back clean, because whatever else you are, sir, I have not heard one person suggest you're a thief. Dowd's mouth moved. You are not a thief, Whitcomb said. You are a lonely man who found out that a woman had been kind to him by post and who could not survive the town, finding out that he'd hoped. And so you took the only thing you had, which was drawers and books and dates, and you set it against a schoolteacher and a 6-year-old girl. That is not larceny, Mr. Dowd. It is a great deal worse, and there is no statute for it. Emmett Dowd sat down without being told to. Mr. Fitch? Harlan Fitch stood. You gave testimony this morning that was not asked for, that helped nobody who called you, and that I expect will follow you the rest of your life in this valley. Yes, Your Honor. Was it true? It was. The 11th of August. The 11th. Have you told your neighbors? I've told them now. Whitcomb nodded slowly. I'm going to say something to you off the record, and the Reverend need not write it down. He set his papers aside. I closed a road myself. In '73 at Deer Lodge when I was a young man with a commission and no sense. 6 died. I have never known either Mr. Fitch, and I am 61, and if you are waiting for the year it comes clear, I'd not hold your breath. Harlan Fitch stood there with his hands at his sides. Thank you, Your Honor. Sit down. Whitcomb picked his papers back up. One last matter, and then I want my dinner. He looked around the room. This building has been empty since July for want of a teacher. Is the school board present? 3 men stood up. Fitch stood with them. You dismissed a teacher on the 20th of July 4-1 on a letter. We did, Fitch said. Have you since hired one? No, Your Honor. Have you advertised? We had 31 children and no salary line to spare on 2 advertisements, Your Honor, so we've been waiting on. Mr. Fitch, I am a judge, not a fool. You have not advertised because every one of you knew exactly what you'd done, and none of you could stand to write the letter. Fitch's jaw worked. That's about the size of it. This court has no authority over a school board, and I want that understood by everyone standing in this room. Whitcomb set the papers down flat. What this court has is a schoolhouse it is presently sitting in, and a district full of parents, and a woman with 5 years at the 2nd Ward School in St. Louis, who has just been found by a territorial judge to be a fit person to raise a child. What you do with those facts is entirely your own business. He stood up. This court's adjourned. Reverend, my dinner's at the hotel, and you're buying it because you argued a whole morning without a license, and I've decided not to notice. The board met in the yard. They met in the yard because there were 140 people who would not go home, and Harlan Fitch, who had been chairman for 9 years, and had never in his life put a vote where the public could hear it, climbed up on the schoolhouse step and said, We'll have it here. Harlan. We'll have it here, Emmett. We had the last one on a platform. Dowd sat down on the bottom and put his head in his hands. Motion to offer the position of teacher for the Red Valley District to Mrs. Clara Stone at the salary contracted in March, with back wages from the 21st of July. Back wages. She'd have been teaching, Fitch said. She'd have been teaching if I hadn't tore up her paper. That's what back wages is for. Harlan, the levy won't. Then it comes out of my pocket, and I'll thank you not to argue about my pocket in my own front yard. He looked around. Second, said Odell Pratt. Odell, you ain't on the board. Well, put me on it, Pratt said. You've got a vacancy. Somebody laughed. It was the good kind. Vote, Fitch said. Ayes. 3 hands. Nays. Emmett Dowd sat on the bottom step with his head in his hands and did not raise it. Mr. Dowd, Fitch said. How do you vote? Harlan, you're still on this board till the audit says otherwise, and you'll vote in front of these people like the rest of us. Emmett Dowd lifted his head. He looked at Clara Stone standing in that yard with a 6-year-old girl holding onto her skirt, and a mountain rancher standing a half step behind her, and every soul in Red Valley watched him do it. Aye, he said. He got up and walked out through the crowd, and it opened for him, and nobody said one word to him the whole way. And Clara afterward, at 2 a.m. for years, thought that the silence was the cruelest thing that town did all summer, and that she had stood there and let it happen, and had not been able to make herself do otherwise. Mrs. Stone. Fitch was still on the step. The board's made you an offer. Clara stood there. Mr. Fitch, I'd like to say a thing first. Say it. You did not do this for me. The yard went quiet. You did it because a judge stood in your schoolhouse and said out loud what this town's been swallowing since July, and because you've got 31 children and no teacher, and because you have got something to be sorry for, and this is a cheap way to be sorry." Clara's voice carried. "And I want that said out loud in this yard, because I'll not spend the next 20 years being grateful for a thing that was owed." Nobody breathed. "That's fair," Harlan Fitch said. "Is it? It's fair, and it ain't complete." He came down one step. "Mrs. Stone, I've got one boy in the ground, and one door in my house. I hadn't opened in 3 years, and that child went in it on Monday and read his slate out to me in the hall. She told me his name and the date he wrote, and I have not been able to say either since 1879. His voice went. "So no, ma'am, I ain't doing this for you. I'm doing it because I have been counting for 3 years, and I have finally run into something that don't count." Clara stood in that yard for a long moment. "I'll take the position," she said. "Ma'am. On 2 conditions. Name 'em." "The first is that no letter is ever written to any school in this territory about any teacher of this district without that teacher being handed a copy the same day. In writing. In the minutes." "Done." "The second," Clara said, "is that when Mr. Dowd's audit comes back clean, this board will say so out loud in this yard to these people. Not in a minute book. Out loud." Harlan Fitch looked at her. "That man tried to take your girl. That man wrote me 40 letters, Clara said, and every one of them was kind, and he did what he did because this town would have laughed at him. You want to know what's wrong with Red Valley, Mr. Fitch? It ain't Emmett Dowd. It's that a grown man was more afraid of being laughed at than of being wicked, and I'll not fix that by teaching your children to do the laughing." Amos Deal from the back of the crowd said, "Well, hell," and got hushed by 4 people at once. They started back up the ridge at 3 in the afternoon. They got about a mile. "Stop the wagon," Clara said. "Ma'am. Stop it." Caleb pulled up. Clara sat there with her hands in her lap. "I don't know what to do," she said, "about any of it. Caleb, I have spent every minute since the 21st of July doing the next thing. Get off the bench, get up the road, get the license, get through Wednesday, and it's Wednesday afternoon, and there isn't a next thing, and I don't know what I am. You're a school teacher with back wages. Don't. I ain't teasing you." He set the lines down. "Clara, I come off that ridge 3 years ago exactly 1 time a season, and I done it because there wasn't nothing at the top worth staying for, and nothing at the bottom worth going to. You know what I done for 3 years? I done the next thing. Feed water, ride the fence, count the head. And then a woman got down on her knees on public boards and picked up paper. Caleb, you want to know what's next, he said. I'll tell you what's next. It's about 6,000 suppers. Clara laughed and it came out ragged. Nell between them said, "Are you going to kiss her?" Nell. Mrs. Fitch said he ought to have by now. Mrs. Fitch is a gossip, Clara said, and she is also the bravest woman in this county, and both of those can be true. That's what you said about the true thing, Nell said. You said sometimes it's ugly, and it's still the true thing. When did I say that? You didn't. The judge did. Nell scuffed her boot on the footboard. He said don't help him. He said grown people always try to help and it makes it worse. Caleb Stone said slowly, "What did you tell him, honey?" "Everything. Everything. He asked me where I wanted to live, and I said with you, and he said that was quick." Nell shrugged. "I said he told me not to help him. He didn't say be slow." Clara put both hands over her face. "And then he asked me what if he said no." "What did you say?" "I said I'd go," Nell said. "But I'd talk the whole time, till somebody got tired of it and brought me home." Caleb Stone sat on that wagon seat with the lines slack in his hands and could not for a while make any words at all. "Mr. Stone. Miss Nell. You're doing the thing again." "What thing?" "Where your hand shakes," she said, "and you go off to the barn." "Ain't no barn out here." "That's why I said it." Amos Deal had held the place alone all day and had a fire going and 4 plates out, and when they came into the yard, he came off the porch faster than a man of 60 ought to and stopped dead 6 feet short. "Well?" "She stays," Caleb said. "Say it again." "She stays Amos, forever. Judge is signing papers in October." Amos Deal stood in that yard and cried like a child in front of all three of them, and then said, "There's beans on," and went inside and slammed the door. They ate at 7. At 9, Clara put Nell to bed in the room with the bolt on the inside, and came out, and Caleb was standing in the yard. "Ma'am, you've been out here an hour." 20 minutes. "An hour," Clara said. "I've been counting. It's a habit. When a thing goes right, I stand somewhere and count too. I've only just found that out about myself today." He turned around. "I want to ask you a thing," he said, "and I've been trying to get it in order since the Ford." "Then say it wrong. I've been 3 years going up that hill at the same hour every evening and standing there and not saying nothing." Caleb's voice was perfectly steady, and his hands were not. "And I've worked out why. It's on account of if I say a name out loud, then it's over. The saying, it is the end of it. And I've been holding on to not saying it like a man holding a rope, and the rope don't go anywhere, Clara. It don't go one place, and I have known that for about 2 years and could not let go of it by myself." Clara did not move. "Will you come up there with me? Now. Now." They walked up together, and Clara did not take his arm, and he did not offer it, and they stood at the 2 markers, one long and one very short. "I don't know how it's done," Caleb said. "There isn't a way it's done." "Then I'll do it wrong." "Do it wrong." Caleb Stone took his hat off. "Marion," he said, and then he could not get the second one out. He stood there and tried 3 times, and Clara Winslow Stone stood beside him, and did not touch him, and did not say a word, because she had learned somewhere between St. Louis and Montana territory that the worst thing you can do to a person carrying something is take it off them before they've set it down. "Thomas," Caleb said. It came out broken all the way across. "Thomas Stone, 4 years old." He had both hands on his hat. "And I couldn't get up the road, son, and I have wanted 3 years to tell somebody I couldn't get up the road, and I'm telling her, and I'd be obliged if you'd—" He stopped. "I'd be obliged if you'd not mind that there's somebody else on the place." Clara said, "Caleb." "Ma'am." "He wouldn't mind?" "You don't know that." "No," Clara said. "But Amos knew him, and Amos said in his own yard 3 weeks ago that Thomas would have liked her. He said the boy was a talker, and he'd have talked enough for the both of them." Caleb Stone put his hat against his chest and stood there. "He was too," he said. "God, he was. He'd talk to a fence post." "So did Nell," Clara said. "Before, Ruth used to say she'd wear a stone down, and the 2 of them stood on that hill and laughed, which is a thing that happens at graves more often than people admit, and neither of them was ashamed of it. Going down at the 3rd switchback, Clara said, "Caleb." "Ma'am." "We've been married 5 days." 6. 6. She stopped walking. "You have not once looked at me, and I want to say plain that I know exactly why, and that I have never in my life been treated so carefully by anybody, and that I am done with it." Caleb stopped. "Ma'am. Don't ma'am me on a mountain in the dark." "Clara." "That's better." She turned around. "I want to tell you when it was, because you'll want to know someday, and I'd rather say it now while I've got the nerve the same as I did in the yard." "All right." "It wasn't the depot," Clara said. "At the depot, I'd have gone with anybody who wasn't cruel, and I'll not pretend different. It wasn't the license, and it wasn't the horses, and it wasn't this morning, though. This morning nearly finished me." "Then when?" "The day you put a lead rope in a 6-year-old's hand and walked off." Clara's voice went. "I stood in that yard with my fists shut hating you, and she held that horse for an hour and 10 minutes, and she would not give it up. And I understood that a man had just given my sister's daughter the first thing anybody had given her since her mother died. That wasn't pity. And I have loved you since about 4 o'clock that afternoon. Caleb Stone and I have carried it up and down this mountain for 4 weeks without one single place to put it." Caleb Stone stood on that switchback. "Say something." "I'm trying to get it in order." "Don't get it in order." "All right," Caleb said, and reached out and put his hand alongside her face, and Clara Winslow Stone, who had not been touched with tenderness by another adult human being, in 5 years, closed her eyes and put her whole weight into it. School opened the first Monday in September with 31 children and 1 teacher, and Reverend Ames rang the bell because he asked to. Clara Stone stood in the doorway of the building she had crossed 1,000 miles for and watched them come up. And Mabel Deaver's grandson came up, and Roy Bishop's twins came up, and Wade Cotter, who had ridden 11 miles in July to ask a man about a woman, came up leading his daughter by the hand and took his hat clean off and said, "Ma'am, I said a thing in that yard in July I never actually said." "I know you didn't, Mr. Cotter." "I'd have said it." "I know that too." "Yes'm." He put his hat back on. "This here's Ruby. She's slow at her figures and quick with her mouth." "Then we'll get on," Clara said. Nell sat in the second row and talked to everybody. The audit came back in October, and it came back clean to 11 cents, which Odell Pratt said was the most damning thing he'd ever seen, since it proved the man could have stolen anything he wanted and never once did. Harlan Fitch read it out loud in the schoolhouse yard on a Saturday, because Clara had made it a condition, and because he had promised, and he read it in front of about 100 people, and at the end of it he said, "Emmett Dowd is honest, and this county has had the use of him cheap for 9 years, and if any man here has been saying otherwise since August, he can say it to me now." Nobody did. Dowd wasn't there. He'd gone to Deer Lodge in September to assist her, and he wrote to Clara once one letter in that same careful hand that took him plainly a week to write. She read it twice, and then she wrote him back. Caleb found her at it and said, "Ma'am." He asked whether the child had learned her sums. That's what he asked. That's what he had the nerve to ask, Clara said, after 4 pages of getting up to it. "And I'll answer him, and I'll answer the next one too, and I'll tell you why. Because on the 21st of July, every single person in this valley decided who I was without asking, and I have spent 1 summer finding out what that costs, and I will be damned before I do it back to a man for the rest of his life." "You're a hard woman, Clara Stone." "I'm the hardest woman in Montana Territory." "You are," Caleb said. "It's the thing I'd put first." Judge Whitcomb came through on the 9th of October and signed the papers in the schoolhouse with 40 people watching, and he charged the county $2 for it, which was the fee, and put the $2 on the table in front of Clara and said, "Mrs. Stone, I understand you paid exactly this to a deputy clerk in July, under circumstances I'd rather not have on my circuit. Consider the account square." "Your Honor." "Don't argue with a judge, ma'am. It's bad practice." He turned. "Child, come here." Nell came. "Do you know what this paper says?" "It says forever." "It does." Whitcomb held out his hand and shook hers gravely, like she was a man of business. "Miss Stone." Nell stopped dead. "That's not my name." "It is now," Whitcomb said. "That's what the paper does. Though you may keep Winslow in the middle of it, and I'd advise it since it was your mother's." "Nell Winslow Stone. That's the one." Nell turned around and looked at the tall man standing at the back of the room with his hat in his hands. Then she walked the whole length of that schoolhouse in front of 40 people and stopped in front of him and said, "Is that all right?" Caleb Stone got down on one knee. "Miss Nell, you said you'd call me that always." "I did and I will, long as you want it." His voice was going and he did not stop. "It's all right. It's more than all right. I've had a name sitting on a shelf for 3 years with nobody to spend it on." Nell put her hand flat on the back of his hand, the way she had that first week at the supper table, and left it there, 3 breaths. Then she said, "All right, Papa," and went back to her seat, and sat down, and started telling Ruby Cotter about a dog that hears through the floor. Nobody in that schoolhouse said anything for a while. Amos Deal blew his nose like a steamboat. Odell Pratt cried harder than anybody on account of he always did, and Clara Winslow Stone stood at the front of a schoolroom in Red Valley, Montana, with a torn contract in a suitcase, upstairs on a ridge that she had never once thrown away, and thought about a woman on a depot bench in July, with $4.60, and how that woman had been certain perfectly, absolutely certain that her life had ended on those boards at 20 minutes past 4 in the afternoon. She had been wrong. It had started there. Because a town will look at a woman and count her and come up short and be sure of the arithmetic. And every so often, one man will get down off a horse and pick up her suitcase and not ask her a single question about the letter. And that is how a whole valley finds out it has been adding wrong